What if the most important company in the history of modern technology wasn't created by entrepreneurs alone? Think about it. Almost every piece of technology you use today traces its roots back to one place: your iPhone, Google search, NVIDIA chips powering AI, ChatGPT, Tesla, even the GPS guiding your car. They all have one thing in common. They were either born in Silicon Valley or built on technologies that came from it. For decades, we've been told the same story. A few brilliant college dropouts, a garage, venture capital, big dreams. That's the legend. It's a story so powerful that countries around the world have spent billions of dollars trying to build their own Silicon Valley. But what if that story leaves out the most important character? Because buried beneath the famous tales of Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Larry Page, and Mark Zuckerberg is another story, one that rarely makes it into documentaries or business books. A story involving the Pentagon, the Cold War, classified military research, government laboratories, and billions of taxpayer dollars. Here's a question almost nobody asks. Why did the world's biggest technology revolution happen in one small region of Northern California and nowhere else? After all, America had dozens of major cities. New York had money. Boston had world-class universities. Chicago was an industrial powerhouse. Los Angeles had aerospace giants. So why did this one stretch of land between San Francisco and San Jose become the center of the digital universe? Was it simply luck, or did someone deliberately create the conditions for it to happen? The deeper you dig, the stranger the timeline becomes. Long before Apple existed, before Intel made its first microprocessor, before Google, Facebook, or Tesla, the U.S. government was quietly pouring enormous amounts of money into electronics, semiconductors, and computing, not to build the next billion-dollar startup, but to win the Cold War. Military agencies needed smaller computers, faster chips, better communication systems, more reliable satellites. They weren't trying to invent smartphones or social media. Yet the technologies they funded would eventually make all of those things possible. And that's where the mystery begins. Because many of the companies that later became household names weren't just operating near government research. They were built by people whose careers were deeply connected to military contracts, defense projects, or federally funded research institutions. Coincidence? Maybe. But when the same pattern appears over and over again, it starts to look less like coincidence and more like a blueprint. Now, to be clear, this isn't a story about a secret meeting where politicians drew a map and decided to invent Silicon Valley overnight. History is rarely that simple. Instead, it's about something far more fascinating. What if the government didn't intentionally create Silicon Valley as we know it, but accidentally built the perfect ecosystem for it to emerge? In this video, we're going back to the years before Silicon Valley even had its name. We'll uncover the forgotten military projects, the hidden flow of government money, the university partnerships, and the Cold War decisions that transformed a quiet valley of fruit orchards into the most influential technology hub on Earth. Because once you see how it all fits together, you'll never look at Silicon Valley the same way again. But for now, all you need to do is relax. Let your shoulders soften and allow your breathing to become slow and steady. As we leave behind the modern skyline of glass offices and glowing computer screens, imagine instead peaceful orchards stretching across a quiet California valley beneath a gentle evening sky. Let your thoughts grow lighter as this remarkable story begins. And if sleep comes before the next chapter unfolds, simply let it carry you there. Long before the world associated this corner of California with billion-dollar startups and cutting-edge artificial intelligence, travelers knew it by a very different name. They called it the Valley of Heart's Delight. The name wasn't marketing. It was simply the truth. Each spring, hundreds of thousands of fruit trees burst into bloom across the Santa Clara Valley. White, pink, and pale peach blossoms covered the landscape so completely that visitors often describe the valley as looking like it had been dusted with snow. The fragrance drifted for miles, carried by cool breezes flowing between the San Francisco Bay and the coastal mountains. Farmers timed their harvests with remarkable precision. Canneries worked around the clock. Railroad cars departed loaded with apricots, cherries, peaches, plums, pears, and prunes destined for kitchens across America and even overseas. It was one of the richest agricultural regions in the country. If someone had stood here in 1920 and predicted that this peaceful farming valley would someday become the technological center of the world, most people would have laughed. There were no skyscrapers, no venture capital firms, no software companies, no semiconductor factories, no billion-dollar corporations, just orchards. So how did one become the other? The answer begins much earlier than most people realize. Long before computers, before electricity became common, and even before California became a state, this valley already possessed several quiet advantages that history would eventually reward. The first Europeans arrived in the late 18th century when Spain began establishing missions along the California coast. In 1777, the Pueblo de San Jose was founded only a few miles from what would later become Silicon Valley. It was the first civilian town established in what is now California. The Spanish were not thinking about technology. Their priorities were religion, agriculture, and securing Spain's claims against rival empires. Yet those early settlements introduced organized farming to the fertile valley. Irrigation systems expanded, ranches spread across the landscape. Small communities slowly formed around churches and trading routes. When Mexico gained independence from Spain in 1821, ownership of vast ranches shifted to Mexican authorities and influential families. Cattle dominated the economy for several decades. Hides and tallow became valuable exports, earning California the nickname Hide and Tallow Country. Then another dramatic change arrived. In 1848, gold was discovered in the Sierra Nevada. Almost overnight, California became the destination for one of history's greatest migrations. The gold rush transformed San Francisco into a booming port city. Thousands of fortune seekers poured through the region. While many chased dreams in the mountains, others discovered something equally valuable: selling food. Mining camps needed supplies every single day. Farmers around Santa Clara Valley realized fertile land could often produce steadier wealth than uncertain gold mines. Orchards expanded rapidly. Agricultural techniques improved. Local businesses flourished by feeding California's exploding population. Sometimes the greatest fortunes are made not by joining a rush, but by supplying it. That lesson would quietly repeat itself more than a century later when Silicon Valley companies began selling tools for the digital revolution instead of simply participating in it. Geography once again was shaping history. The Santa Clara Valley enjoyed an unusually favorable climate. Warm, dry summers produced excellent growing conditions, while mild winters rarely brought the devastating freezes common elsewhere in the United States. Rich alluvial soil, created over thousands of years by rivers flowing from nearby mountains, supported diverse crops. The valley also possessed another hidden advantage. It sat between two mountain ranges. To the west rose the Santa Cruz Mountains. To the east stood the Diablo Range. Together, they sheltered the valley from harsher weather while creating a comfortable Mediterranean climate unlike much of the country. This pleasant environment would eventually become attractive for a very different reason. Engineers, scientists, and entrepreneurs liked living here. That may sound like a small detail, but history repeatedly shows that talented people often choose places where life is enjoyable. Innovation rarely happens in isolation. It flourishes where people want to stay. Climate alone, however, cannot explain Silicon Valley. Many beautiful places never become centers of technological innovation. The next piece of the puzzle arrived with transportation. During the 19th century, railroads stitched California together. The Southern Pacific Railroad connected the valley with San Francisco to the north and Los Angeles to the south. Fruit grown in Santa Clara County could now reach distant markets before spoiling. Refrigerated rail cars made exports even more profitable. Communities expanded around train stations. Businesses followed transportation. Workers followed businesses. Every generation inherited a slightly stronger economic foundation than the last. Few noticed they were also building infrastructure that future industries would depend upon. Roads improved, utilities expanded, population slowly increased. None of this looked revolutionary at the time. History often doesn't. It usually resembles countless ordinary decisions that only become extraordinary when viewed decades later. By the early 20th century, Santa Clara Valley had become one of America's agricultural success stories. Thousands of seasonal workers harvested fruit. Large canning companies processed enormous quantities of produce. Local banks financed farms. Schools educated growing communities. Families built stable lives centered around agriculture. One famous local company, Del Monte, became synonymous with canned fruits shipped across the world. Massive processing plants employed thousands of workers during harvest season. Entire neighborhoods depended upon agriculture for their livelihoods. The valley had found its identity, or so everyone believed. Yet hidden beneath the surface, another institution was quietly preparing to reshape everything. Its name was Stanford University. The story of Stanford begins not with science, but with unimaginable tragedy. Leland Stanford was one of the wealthiest men in America. He had made his fortune through railroads, serving as one of the famous Big Four who built the Central Pacific Railroad across the Sierra Nevada. He also served as governor of California and later as a United States Senator. By every measure, he had achieved extraordinary success. Then, his only child died. Leland Stanford Jr. was just 15 years old when typhoid fever claimed his life during a family trip to Europe in 1884. The loss devastated his parents. Searching for a way to honor their son, Leland and Jane Stanford made an astonishing decision. "If the children of California shall be our children," Leland reportedly said, "we will found a university." It was one of the most ambitious educational projects in American history. Instead of creating a small college, they envisioned an institution that combined practical knowledge with advanced research. Unlike many older universities focused primarily on classical education, Stanford encouraged engineering, applied sciences, and innovation alongside traditional subjects. When Stanford University officially opened in 1891, it stood surrounded by open fields and orchards rather than bustling city streets. Its location seemed almost isolated. Some critics wondered whether placing a major university so far from established urban centers made any sense. Ironically, that isolation would later become one of its greatest strengths. The university possessed room to grow. Lots of room. As decades passed, Stanford acquired thousands of acres of land surrounding the campus. Most remained undeveloped for years. At first, this seemed excessive. Later, it became one of the university's greatest strategic assets. Land that appeared almost worthless in the early 20th century would eventually house laboratories, research centers, startup companies, and some of the world's most valuable real estate. Sometimes the future depends on resources people don't yet recognize as valuable. Stanford also developed a culture unlike many prestigious universities of its era. Rather than treating engineering as secondary to law or literature, it embraced technical education. Students learned mathematics, physics, electrical engineering, mechanical design, practical problem solving. The university encouraged collaboration between professors and industry, an idea that would eventually become central to Silicon Valley's identity. But during these early decades, nobody imagined the scale of what was coming. Graduates often left California for better opportunities elsewhere. The East Coast still dominated American finance, manufacturing, and research. New York attracted ambitious businessmen. Boston possessed world-famous universities. Pittsburgh produced steel. Detroit manufactured automobiles. Northern California remained distant from the nation's centers of power. That geographic isolation created challenges, but also unexpected freedom. Without centuries of established traditions, California often proved more willing to experiment. Young people arriving in the state sensed possibility. They encountered fewer rigid social expectations than existed in older parts of the country. Failure carried less stigma. Starting over seemed normal. Reinventing yourself almost became part of the culture. Those attitudes were subtle. Nobody called it startup culture. Not yet. But the seeds were already present. Another quiet advantage emerged through immigration. California attracted people from across the United States and around the world. Some arrived seeking farmland. Others came for trade, education, or opportunity. Different languages, customs, and perspectives mixed in growing communities. Innovation frequently emerges where diverse ideas collide. The Santa Clara Valley became exactly that kind of meeting place. Still, none of these developments guaranteed technological greatness. There were fertile valleys elsewhere, outstanding universities elsewhere, railroads elsewhere, immigrants elsewhere. The missing ingredient had not yet appeared. That ingredient would be a person. One professor with an unusual vision. Unlike many academics, he believed universities should not simply educate students and send them away. He believed they should create entirely new industries. His name was Frederick Terman. Most Americans have never heard of him. Yet without Frederick Terman, there is a very real chance the phrase Silicon Valley would never have existed. Before he inspired entrepreneurs, before famous garages, before semiconductor companies, and before billions of dollars flowed into California, he quietly began asking a question that few university leaders had considered. Why should Stanford's brightest minds leave California to build someone else's future? What if they stayed instead? That simple idea would change the course of technological history. But for now, there's nothing you need to solve or figure out. Let the image of endless orchards, quiet railways, and peaceful California evenings settle gently in your mind. Breathe slowly and allow the story to unfold at its own unhurried pace. As the blossoms drift softly across the Valley of Heart's Delight, let your thoughts drift just as gently. Go to sleep, knowing that tomorrow's world is still many years away, waiting patiently beyond these tranquil fields. History often celebrates inventors. It remembers the people who build revolutionary machines, discover new scientific principles, or create companies that change the world. But every once in a while, history is quietly redirected by someone who invents almost nothing. Someone whose greatest achievement is recognizing the potential in other people. Someone who sees not just what exists today, but what could exist decades into the future. Silicon Valley had many brilliant engineers. It had visionary entrepreneurs. It had daring investors. But before any of them transformed the world, one professor asked a deceptively simple question. What if the smartest young minds didn't have to leave California to succeed? That professor was Frederick Emmons Terman. Today, his name rarely appears alongside Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Larry Page, or Elon Musk. Yet many historians consider him one of the most influential figures in the history of modern technology. Without him, Silicon Valley might have remained exactly what it had always been, a beautiful agricultural valley. To understand why, we have to begin with Frederick Terman's childhood. He was born in 1900 in Indiana, but his family soon moved west when his father accepted a position at the newly established Stanford University. His father, Lewis Terman, would become one of America's most famous psychologists. He is best known for refining what became the Stanford-Binet intelligence scale, one of the earliest standardized IQ tests. Their home was filled with books, scientific discussions, and university life. Young Frederick grew up surrounded by professors. Unlike many children, he spent his early years watching scholars debate ideas at the dinner table. Education wasn't simply encouraged, it was the family business. But Frederick's childhood wasn't especially easy. He struggled with poor health for much of his youth. Doctors worried about his heart, and periods of illness often kept him away from the rough and tumble activities enjoyed by other children. Instead, he read, he experimented, he became fascinated by radios, electrical circuits, and the invisible forces that carried voices through the air. At the dawn of the 20th century, electricity still felt magical. Wireless communication was one of humanity's newest wonders. Across the world, inventors were racing to improve radio technology. Young Frederick became captivated by that invisible world. He wasn't merely interested in using technology, he wanted to understand how it worked. After graduating from Stanford, Terman continued his studies at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, better known as MIT. At the time, MIT represented the pinnacle of engineering education in America. The contrast between the East Coast and California was impossible to ignore. Boston was overflowing with established laboratories, industrial giants, investors, and research opportunities. California, by comparison, still felt distant. Ambitious engineers frequently left the West Coast because that was where the best careers seemed to exist. Most never returned. For decades, California had suffered from what economists today call a brain drain. Its brightest graduates were exporting their talent to someone else's economy. Most people accepted this as inevitable. Terman did not. When he returned to Stanford in the late 1920s as a young professor, he saw something others overlooked. The university was producing exceptional engineers. The problem wasn't education. The problem was opportunity. Students earned their degrees, packed their bags, and disappeared to companies in New York, New Jersey, Boston, or Chicago. Stanford became a supplier of talent rather than the center of an industry. Terman found that deeply frustrating. He believed California deserved something more ambitious. Instead of asking how Stanford could become more like Eastern universities, he began asking a far more interesting question. Why couldn't California build its own technology industry? It was an audacious thought. The East Coast dominated electronics. Major corporations such as General Electric, Westinghouse, RKA, and Bell Telephone Laboratories controlled much of America's electrical research. Competing against them seemed unrealistic. But Terman believed geography didn't determine destiny. People did. His classroom quickly developed a reputation unlike any other. He wasn't simply interested in lectures or examinations. He challenged students to solve practical problems. He encouraged experimentation. Most importantly, he encouraged confidence. He repeatedly told students something few professors of his era would ever say. You don't have to work for a big company. You can build one. That idea seems obvious today. In the 1930s, it sounded almost reckless. America was trapped in the Great Depression. Businesses were collapsing. Banks were failing. Millions of people were unemployed. Starting a company during such uncertainty appeared extraordinarily risky. Yet Terman continued encouraging exactly that. Among the many students who passed through his classroom were two young engineers named William Hewlett and David Packard. The two became close friends while studying electrical engineering at Stanford. They were talented, curious, practical. Like many graduates, they faced a familiar decision: leave California or stay. Terman urged them to stay. More than that, he encouraged them to become entrepreneurs. He even helped them refine business ideas and introduced them to people who could support their ambitions. Eventually, Hewlett and Packard rented a small garage behind a modest house at 367 Addison Avenue in Palo Alto. The building itself was utterly ordinary: wooden walls, simple workbench, very little space. No one standing outside would have guessed history was quietly unfolding inside. There, the pair began building precision electronic instruments. Their first major success wasn't a computer. It wasn't a smartphone. It wasn't software. It was an audio oscillator, a device capable of producing electronic test signals used by engineers. The design was clever because it was inexpensive without sacrificing accuracy. One of their earliest customers happened to be Walt Disney Studios. Engineers working on the groundbreaking animated film Fantasia purchased several Hewlett-Packard oscillators to test sophisticated sound equipment. It was an encouraging beginning. But the company's greatest significance wasn't its first product. It was the example it set. For perhaps the first time, Stanford graduates had built a successful high-technology company without leaving California. Terman watched with satisfaction. His experiment was working. He later described entrepreneurship almost as an extension of education. Students didn't simply graduate, they continued creating knowledge through businesses. Those businesses then hired future graduates. The cycle reinforced itself. Today, people lovingly refer to Hewlett-Packard's first workspace as the garage where Silicon Valley was born. The phrase contains an important truth, but it is also incomplete. Garages don't create ecosystems by themselves. Imagine planting one healthy tree in the middle of an empty field. The tree may flourish, but without fertile soil, water, sunlight, and countless other plants nearby, you don't get a forest. You get one tree. Terman wanted an entire forest, and he understood something that would become one of Silicon Valley's defining characteristics. Innovation grows faster when brilliant people live close together. Ideas travel surprisingly quickly over lunch, during hallway conversations, or while neighbors chat over backyard fences. Physical proximity matters. Instead of scattering talented graduates across the country, Terman wanted them clustered around Stanford. That required something California still lacked: a place where research laboratories, private companies, and university scientists could work side by side. Fortunately, Stanford possessed one resource almost nobody else had: land, an enormous amount of it. By the early 1950s, the university faced financial challenges. Maintaining thousands of acres wasn't easy. Many institutions might simply have sold portions to housing developers. Terman proposed something radically different. Rather than selling the land, Stanford would lease it to carefully selected technology companies. The businesses would establish research facilities next to the university. Students could intern there. Professors could collaborate with engineers. Graduates could find careers without leaving the area. Knowledge would circulate constantly. In 1951, This vision became reality with the creation of the Stanford Industrial Park, later renamed the Stanford Research Park. At first glance, it seemed like a straightforward real estate project. In reality, it represented an entirely new model for economic development. Companies such as Hewlett-Packard, Varian Associates, General Electric, Lockheed, Kodak, and numerous smaller firms established research operations nearby. The result wasn't accidental. Terman personally recruited companies. He persuaded executives. He connected scientists with investors. He introduced students to employers. He spent countless hours acting less like a professor and more like an ecosystem builder. Today we might call him a network architect. He understood something economists would later spend decades studying. Innovation is rarely isolated. It happens where talented people repeatedly encounter one another. One engineer solves a problem, another improves it, someone else turns it into a product. An investor provides funding, a university trains the next generation. The entire system becomes greater than the sum of its parts. Terman built precisely that system. His influence extended far beyond Stanford's campus. During World War II, he directed important radio and radar research at Harvard University's Radio Research Laboratory, helping develop electronic countermeasures that protected Allied bombers from enemy radar. Those years transformed his understanding of government-funded science. He saw firsthand how federal investment could accelerate technological breakthroughs at extraordinary speed. When he returned to Stanford after the war, he brought more than scientific expertise. He brought relationships. Military officials knew him. Federal agencies trusted him. Research organizations respected him. Those connections became invaluable as Cold War spending expanded. Terman aggressively pursued federal research grants. Defense contracts flowed toward Stanford, laboratories expanded. Faculty numbers grew. Graduate programs attracted outstanding students from around the world. This wasn't luck, it was strategy. Terman understood that universities, government, and private industry did not need to operate separately. Each could strengthen the others. Government funding supported university research. Universities produced skilled engineers. Private companies transformed discoveries into useful products. Successful companies generated wealth. That wealth attracted more talent. The cycle repeated again and again. Decades later, people would describe this relationship as the triple helix of innovation. Terman had been putting it into practice long before the phrase became fashionable. His vision also reshaped the culture of engineering. Many large corporations of the era were rigidly hierarchical. Employees followed instructions. Young engineers waited years before receiving meaningful responsibility. The companies emerging around Stanford often felt different. They encouraged experimentation. Managers listened to junior engineers. Failure wasn't automatically punished. Employees moved between companies, carrying ideas and expertise with them. That movement alarmed some executives. Terman saw it as healthy. Knowledge should spread. Competition should inspire better ideas. No single company should monopolize innovation. These beliefs quietly became part of Silicon Valley's DNA. Looking back today, it is remarkable how many defining characteristics of Silicon Valley can be traced to one educator's philosophy. Close collaboration, entrepreneurship, university partnerships, research parks, networking, risk-taking, knowledge sharing. None of these appeared overnight. Each required years of patient cultivation. Frederick Terman wasn't designing Silicon Valley according to some secret master plan. He simply believed that talented people, given the right environment, could accomplish extraordinary things. History proved him spectacularly correct. For these reasons, historians often call him the father of Silicon Valley. Not because he invented the transistor, not because he founded Intel, not because he created the personal computer, but because he built the environment in which all of those things became far more likely to happen. He planted the orchard from which countless technological breakthroughs would eventually grow. Yet even Terman's remarkable vision had limits. He could encourage entrepreneurs, he could recruit companies, he could reshape Stanford. But creating an entirely new technology economy required something much larger than one university. It required a customer with almost unlimited resources, a customer willing to spend enormous amounts of money on research, electronics, and scientific talent. That customer arrived not because America sought technological dominance in consumer products. It arrived because the world had descended into its deadliest conflict. World War II was about to transform Santa Clara Valley forever. But for now, simply let your mind grow quiet. Imagine the soft glow of a desk lamp in a professor's office long after sunset, where ideas are sketched onto paper with no certainty they will ever change the world. Feel the calm of a peaceful California evening settling over the campus, the orchards resting beyond its walls, and the stars slowly filling the sky. Let your breathing become slower, your thoughts lighter, and allow yourself to drift comfortably towards sleep, knowing that the greatest transformations often begin with one quiet idea. In the years before World War II, Frederick Terman's vision was beginning to take shape. A handful of promising companies had been founded. Stanford's engineering department was gaining respect. Young graduates were choosing to remain in California rather than immediately moving east. It was encouraging progress. But progress was slow. Silicon Valley, though nobody called it that yet, was still little more than a regional center for engineering. Agriculture remained the valley's dominant industry, and fruit orchards still stretched farther than laboratories. Had history continued peacefully, the transformation might have taken generations. Instead, the world exploded into war. And with that war came something no professor, entrepreneur, or investor could have imagined. The United States government arrived with resources unlike anything the region had ever seen. Not to build computers for ordinary people, not to create billion-dollar startups, but to win a war that threatened the future of civilization itself. Suddenly, Washington wasn't just interested in California. It needed California, and that changed everything. The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, marked America's official entry into World War II. The next morning, the country's priorities changed almost overnight. Factories that had once produced refrigerators began manufacturing aircraft engines. Automobile companies shifted to tanks and military trucks. Universities that had focused on education suddenly became research centers for national defense. Scientists who had spent years pursuing abstract questions found themselves working on urgent military problems. The federal government understood something that earlier generations of leaders often underestimated. Modern wars were no longer won by armies alone. They were won by technology. A nation with better radar could detect enemy aircraft sooner. A nation with better communications could coordinate its forces more effectively. A nation with more accurate navigation systems could strike farther, faster, and with greater precision. Science had become a weapon, and America intended to master it. One of the greatest technological races of the war involved something most civilians had never even heard of. Radar today, radar feels ordinary. Air traffic controllers rely on it every day. Weather forecasters use it to track storms. Ships navigate safely because of it, but in the late 1930s, radar was one of the most closely guarded military secrets on Earth. The basic idea sounds deceptively simple. Send out radio waves, wait for them to bounce off an object, measure how long they take to return. From those echoes, determine the location of an aircraft or ship, even in darkness, fog, or heavy clouds. In practice, however, building reliable radar systems was incredibly difficult. The electronics had to be extraordinarily precise. Signals had to be amplified without introducing distortion. Receivers needed unprecedented sensitivity. Small improvements could mean the difference between detecting an incoming bomber several minutes earlier or not detecting it at all. Those few minutes could save an entire city. America urgently needed engineers capable of solving these problems. Fortunately, one of its most talented experts was Frederick Terman. Although today he is remembered for helping shape Silicon Valley, during World War II he temporarily left Stanford to direct electronic warfare research at Harvard University's Radio Research Laboratory. There, he oversaw teams developing systems designed to confuse, deceive, and jam enemy radar. Imagine two invisible armies battling through radio waves. One side sends signals, the other creates false echoes. Pilots disappear from enemy screens. Bombers appear where none exist. Entire formations become difficult to track. This was warfare entering an entirely new dimension. Victory increasingly depended not only on soldiers, but on physicists, mathematicians, and electrical engineers. Terman witnessed firsthand how rapidly innovation could accelerate when governments invested without hesitation. Projects that might have taken decades in peacetime were completed in months. Money flowed freely. Scientists collaborated across institutions. The urgency of survival erased many bureaucratic barriers. The experience permanently shaped Terman's thinking. If government support could produce revolutionary breakthroughs during war, perhaps similar partnerships could continue afterward. That idea would later become one of Silicon Valley's defining characteristics. Meanwhile, back in California, Stanford itself was changing. The university became deeply involved in wartime research. Engineering departments expanded, laboratories operated longer hours. Faculty members worked on classified military projects. Students increasingly viewed engineering not merely as an academic discipline, but as a patriotic duty. Entire generations of young Americans entered universities believing their knowledge might help shorten the war. For Stanford, this meant opportunity unlike anything it had experienced before. Federal agencies began awarding research contracts at unprecedented levels. Instead of relying primarily on tuition and donations, universities now received substantial government funding for scientific work. This represented a profound shift. For much of American history, universities had largely remained separate from Washington. Now, they became strategic national assets. The relationship would never fully return to what it had been before. Across America, dozens of universities participated in wartime research. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology became famous for its radiation laboratory. The University of Chicago helped develop nuclear technology. Los Alamos emerged as the secret home of the Manhattan Project. Stanford joined this growing network of institutions where scientific discovery and national defense became deeply intertwined. The government wasn't choosing favorites. It was building an innovation army. Yet California possessed advantages that made it especially attractive. Its distance from Europe's battlefields provided safety. Its expanding aerospace industry needed advanced electronics. Its universities produced highly trained engineers. And perhaps most importantly, there was room to grow. Land was available. New laboratories could be constructed. Entire research campuses could expand without the space constraints facing older eastern cities. Geography, once again, quietly influenced history. The San Francisco Bay Area also benefited from its proximity to military installations. The Pacific Ocean had suddenly become America's primary theater of war. Naval bases expanded, shipyards operated day and night, aircraft manufacturing surged throughout California. Every new bomber, fighter, submarine, and warship required increasingly sophisticated electronics. Demand for engineers skyrocketed. Small companies that had once struggled to find customers suddenly found themselves overwhelmed with orders. A young engineer could graduate from Stanford and almost immediately find work contributing to the war effort. The opportunities seemed endless. For businesses, federal contracts offered something every entrepreneur dreams about: guaranteed customers. Instead of worrying whether consumers might purchase a new product, companies built equipment the military had already agreed to buy. That certainty encouraged investment. Factories expanded, workers were hired, research intensified. It also changed how companies thought. Rather than asking, "Will this sell?" many began asking, "Can we build something the military needs?" Those two questions would shape Northern California's economy for decades. Among the industries transformed most dramatically was electronics. Before the war, electronic devices occupied relatively small markets. Radios, testing equipment, communication systems, useful products certainly, but limited in scale. The military changed the equation completely. Every aircraft required radios. Every naval vessel needed communication equipment. Radar installations demanded thousands of electronic components. Bombing systems grew increasingly sophisticated. Weapons guidance required greater precision. The appetite for advanced electronics became almost insatiable. Factories that had once measured production in hundreds suddenly measured it in tens of thousands. The war didn't simply increase demand. It forced engineers to solve problems that peacetime markets would never have justified. How do you make electronic equipment lighter, smaller, more reliable, capable of surviving freezing temperatures at high altitude, able to function aboard ships crossing the Pacific? Each solution became valuable long after the war ended. History repeatedly demonstrates this pattern. Military necessity often accelerates technological development. The jet engine, satellite navigation, microwave ovens, the internet. Many civilian technologies trace their origins to defense research. Silicon Valley would become perhaps the greatest example of this phenomenon. Another transformation was occurring quietly inside laboratories. Scientists who had previously worked in isolation suddenly found themselves collaborating across disciplines. Physicists worked alongside engineers. Chemists consulted mathematicians. Industrial researchers exchanged ideas with university professors. Military officers explained operational challenges directly to scientific teams. This cross-pollination proved extraordinarily productive. The boundaries separating academia, government, and private industry began to dissolve. For Silicon Valley's future, this may have been even more important than the money itself. People developed relationships, trust, professional networks. They discovered that innovation happened faster when institutions worked together rather than separately. These relationships didn't disappear when peace returned. They became permanent. California also experienced a remarkable migration during the war. Hundreds of thousands of workers relocated to the West Coast. Some built aircraft. Others assembled ships. Many worked in research laboratories. Scientists from across the country accepted wartime assignments that brought them to California for the first time. Some planned to leave after the war. Many never did. They bought homes, raised families, accepted university positions, started companies. The war unintentionally changed America's map of scientific talent. Before World War II, many of the nation's leading researchers clustered around the Northeast. Afterward, California possessed one of the largest concentrations of scientific expertise anywhere on Earth. No government planner had originally intended this outcome. It simply emerged from wartime necessity. Federal spending reached levels that would have seemed unimaginable only a decade earlier. Washington poured billions of dollars into military production, research, infrastructure, and scientific development. Universities expanded laboratories. Companies purchased advanced equipment. Engineers gained experience solving extraordinarily difficult technical problems. The skills accumulated during these years could not simply be forgotten once peace arrived. In fact, they became the foundation for entirely new industries. This was perhaps the war's greatest unintended consequence. America had not merely built weapons, it had built capability. Capability in electronics, capability in engineering, capability in research management, capability in large-scale scientific collaboration. These capabilities would soon be redirected toward peacetime innovation, but one crucial question remained. What would happen after victory? Many feared the answer would be economic collapse. Throughout history, wartime production had often been followed by painful recessions. Factories closed, government contracts disappeared, workers lost jobs. Would California's growing research community suffer the same fate? Frederick Terman thought differently. He believed the infrastructure, laboratories, and expertise created during the war represented an extraordinary opportunity. If government agencies continued supporting advanced research even during peacetime, America could maintain both technological leadership and economic growth. Remarkably, Washington reached a similar conclusion. The end of World War II did not bring an end to government investment. Instead, a new global rivalry emerged, one even longer than the war itself, one that demanded constant scientific advancement, one that would send rivers of federal money flowing into places like Stanford for decades. It was called the Cold War. And for the quiet valley that had once been covered in apricot orchards, its effects would prove even more transformative than World War II itself. But for now, let the noise of factories and laboratories fade into the distance. Imagine the California night becoming still once again, the day's work complete, with only a cool breeze moving gently through the orchards beneath a sky filled with quiet stars. Let your breathing slow, your mind become lighter, and your thoughts drift peacefully onward. As history prepares for another great turning point, you can simply rest, relax, and allow sleep to come naturally. When Americans celebrated the end of World War II in 1945, millions believed they were witnessing the beginning of a peaceful new era. The deadliest conflict in human history was finally over. Factories could return to civilian production. Soldiers could come home. Families could rebuild their lives. Many assumed that the enormous military research programs which had transformed American science would gradually disappear. After all, what reason would the government have to continue spending billions of dollars on advanced electronics once the war had ended? But history had other plans. Almost before one conflict had truly ended, another had already begun. There would be no formal declaration of war, no single battlefield, no final surrender ceremony. Instead, two superpowers entered a struggle that would last nearly half a century. The United States and the Soviet Union. It became known as the Cold War. Despite its name, it was anything but peaceful. The two nations rarely fought each other directly. Yet they competed in almost every other way imaginable. They raced to build larger nuclear arsenals. They competed in espionage. They battled for influence across Asia, Africa, Europe, and Latin America. They fought proxy wars. And perhaps most importantly, they competed technologically. Each breakthrough by one side immediately forced the other to respond. Every scientific discovery carried potential military consequences. For engineers and scientists, this changed everything. The war against Germany and Japan had been intense but temporary. The Cold War appeared endless. Instead of preparing for one decisive conflict, America now needed to maintain technological superiority year after year. That required something unprecedented: permanent scientific investment. Washington no longer viewed research as an emergency expense. It became part of national defense itself. For places like Stanford and the growing community surrounding it, this was the opportunity Frederick Terman had quietly hoped for. The federal government wasn't going away. It was becoming Silicon Valley's largest customer. The reason was frighteningly simple: nuclear weapons. When the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, the nature of warfare changed forever. Victory was no longer determined solely by the size of armies. A single bomb could destroy an entire city. Within a few years, the Soviet Union developed its own atomic weapons. Soon, both nations possessed hydrogen bombs hundreds of times more powerful than those used during World War II. Human civilization entered an era unlike any before. The challenge was no longer simply building nuclear weapons. It was delivering them. A bomb sitting safely inside a warehouse meant nothing. Military planners needed aircraft capable of flying across continents. Then they wanted missiles. Missiles that could launch within minutes. Missiles that could travel thousands of miles. Missiles accurate enough to strike targets on the opposite side of the planet. Building such weapons required technologies that barely existed: guidance systems, miniature electronics, reliable communications, powerful computers, advanced materials, precision manufacturing. Suddenly, engineers became just as important to national security as soldiers. One tiny electronic component might determine whether a missile reached its destination or disappeared harmlessly into the ocean. The Pentagon understood this, and it was willing to spend enormous amounts of money solving these problems. Unlike ordinary consumers, the Department of Defense rarely searched for the cheapest product. Its priorities were different: performance, reliability, innovation. If a revolutionary electronic system improved national security, cost often became a secondary concern. This created an extraordinary environment for research companies. Imagine trying to invent a groundbreaking technology for ordinary shoppers. Most customers hesitate to spend even a little extra money. Businesses compete fiercely on price. Now imagine your customer is the United States government during the Cold War. If your invention could improve missile guidance, radar detection, or military communications, Washington might fund years of research before a finished product even existed. That completely changed the economics of innovation. Companies could tackle problems too expensive or risky for normal commercial markets. Many of those solutions would later find civilian uses, but national security came first. One company perfectly illustrates this transformation. Lockheed Aircraft Corporation had already become one of America's leading aviation manufacturers during World War II. In the 1950s, it dramatically expanded its operations south of San Francisco, establishing what became Lockheed Missiles in Space near Sunnyvale. The location was no accident. Stanford supplied engineers The federal government supplied contracts. The Cold War supplied urgency. Lockheed engineers worked on some of the most advanced military technologies in existence: ballistic missiles, reconnaissance satellites, spacecraft, navigation systems, classified defense programs. Many employees couldn't even describe their work to friends or family. Some drove through guarded gates each morning, spent the day solving problems of extraordinary complexity, and returned home unable to explain what they had accomplished. Entire careers unfolded behind security clearances. This secrecy became an unexpected part of Northern California's culture. Today, Silicon Valley is famous for public product launches streamed live across the internet. During the Cold War, many of the region's greatest achievements couldn't be discussed at all. Some remained classified for decades, others are still only partially understood. This hidden world quietly fueled the area's technological growth. Lockheed wasn't alone. Across the valley, laboratories multiplied, electronics firms expanded, defense contractors recruited aggressively. The region slowly evolved into something entirely new. Not merely a university town, not merely an agricultural center, but one of America's most important national security ecosystems. Another institution became equally influential. It began with a different mission altogether. In 1946, Stanford established what would later become SRI International, originally known as the Stanford Research Institute. The idea reflected Frederick Terman's philosophy perfectly: create an organization capable of solving real-world problems by combining academic expertise with practical research. Although connected to Stanford in its early years, the institute operated independently, allowing it to work directly with government agencies and private industry. Its projects quickly expanded into astonishingly diverse fields: artificial intelligence, medical technology, robotics, communications, materials science, defense systems, economic research. Many breakthroughs emerged from teams whose names rarely appeared in newspapers. The Institute became one of the places where tomorrow quietly arrived years ahead of public awareness. Government agencies appreciated exactly this kind of organization. Instead of maintaining enormous research departments themselves, they could award contracts to specialized institutions already filled with experts. Scientists gained funding, the government gained innovation. The partnership deepened year after year. The numbers became staggering. By the late 1950s and throughout the 1960s, billions of federal dollars flowed into research universities. Aerospace companies, electronics manufacturers, and defense laboratories across the United States. A significant share reached Northern California. This wasn't charity, it was strategy. Every dollar reflected a calculation. Would this technology help America remain ahead of the Soviet Union? If the answer appeared to be yes, funding often followed. This transformed the daily lives of researchers. Graduate students who might once have struggled to finance their education now worked on federally sponsored projects. Professors managed research programs larger than many private companies. Laboratories purchased sophisticated equipment that universities could never previously have afforded. Entire academic departments expanded because national defense required more engineers. For Stanford, this represented a remarkable evolution. The university that once struggled to keep graduates in California had become one of America's most important suppliers of scientific talent. But another development was reshaping the valley just as dramatically: the rise of aerospace. The word Silicon Valley naturally makes us think about computers. Yet during the 1950s and early 1960s, aircraft and space technologies were often just as important. The Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957 sent shockwaves through the United States. A polished metal sphere no larger than a beach ball suddenly became one of history's most influential objects. As Sputnik circled overhead, broadcasting its simple radio signal, Americans looked toward the sky with a mixture of awe and fear. If the Soviet Union could launch a satellite into orbit, many reasoned, it could also launch nuclear warheads across continents. The implications were terrifying. The space race was never only about exploration. It was deeply connected to military competition. Rockets capable of placing satellites into orbit could also become intercontinental ballistic missiles. The technologies overlapped. Again, Washington responded with unprecedented investment. The newly created National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, expanded rapidly. The Department of Defense increased research spending. Advanced electronics became even more essential. Guidance computers, miniaturized circuits, reliable communications, precision manufacturing. Each challenge created opportunities for companies surrounding Stanford. The aerospace boom attracted another wave of extraordinary talent: mathematicians, physicists, engineers, program managers, computer specialists. Many arrived from other states. Some immigrated from Europe after witnessing the devastation of World War II. Others came from Asia, bringing fresh perspectives and remarkable technical abilities. The region became increasingly international. Ideas flowed almost as freely as people. This diversity would later become one of Silicon Valley's defining strengths. Yet perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Cold War economy was something invisible. The government often paid companies not merely to manufacture products, but to discover entirely new knowledge. Imagine proposing a risky idea with no guarantee of success. A commercial investor might hesitate. The Pentagon often could not afford to. If failure taught valuable lessons, those lessons still strengthened national security. Research itself became valuable. Failure, when managed intelligently, became acceptable. This philosophy encouraged ambitious experimentation. Many projects never succeeded. Some consumed enormous budgets before being abandoned. But the successful ones reshaped entire industries. Integrated circuits, advanced computing, satellite communications, digital networking, all benefited from this environment. Critics occasionally questioned whether such close relationships between government and private companies were healthy. President Dwight D. Eisenhower himself issued a famous warning in 1961. Having served as Supreme Allied Commander during World War II, Eisenhower understood military institutions better than almost anyone. As he prepared to leave office, he cautioned Americans about the growing influence of what he called the military-industrial complex. He worried that permanent partnerships between defense contractors, politicians, and the armed forces might eventually accumulate excessive power. His warning remains debated today. Yet regardless of one's opinion, there is little doubt that these relationships transformed Northern California. The valley's economy no longer depended upon orchards or canneries or seasonal harvests. It increasingly depended upon ideas. Ideas funded by contracts, ideas protected by security clearances, ideas pursued because America believed technological superiority could prevent nuclear war. This produced an extraordinary paradox. Many of the technologies that eventually made civilian life more convenient were originally developed because humanity feared its own destruction. The same region that would one day build personal computers and smartphones first built systems designed to survive and potentially fight a nuclear conflict. Which brings us back to the central question of this documentary. Was Silicon Valley originally created to help ordinary people communicate, shop online, and share photos? Or was its original purpose something entirely different? Looking at the evidence, the answer becomes increasingly clear. The earliest foundations of Silicon Valley were laid not by consumer demand, but by national security. The government did not set out to create social media companies or search engines. It sought better radar, more reliable missiles, faster communications, superior intelligence systems, safer nuclear deterrence. Yet history has a curious habit of producing unintended consequences. The technologies created to defend a nation would eventually transform the daily lives of billions of civilians around the globe. But before that could happen, one invention still had to arrive. It was smaller than a fingernail, made primarily from one common element found in sand, almost invisible to ordinary people. Yet it would become the beating heart of the modern world. Silicon. But for now, the laboratories fall quiet, the guarded gates close for the evening, and the distant hum of machines fades into the calm California night. Above the valley, the stars shine peacefully, just as they did long before rockets, satellites, and secret research facilities filled the landscape below. Let your breathing become slow and effortless. Allow every thought to drift gently away, knowing that for this moment there is nothing to solve, nowhere to hurry, and nothing to do except relax. As history prepares to reveal the tiny invention that would reshape the world, you can simply close your eyes and let sleep arrive naturally. By the late 1950s, Northern California had become something remarkable. The orchards had not completely disappeared. Fruit was still harvested. Families still worked in agriculture. But hidden among those fields stood research laboratories, defense contractors, university buildings, and engineering firms unlike anything that had existed there only 2 decades earlier. The region possessed brilliant scientists, government funding, world-class universities, military customers willing to invest in risky ideas. Everything seemed to be falling into place. Everything except one problem. The machines of the era were still far too large. Early electronic computers were astonishing achievements, but they were also astonishingly impractical. Some occupied entire rooms. Others filled entire floors of buildings. Thousands of vacuum tubes glowed with intense heat. Miles of wiring connected countless individual components. Engineers constantly replaced failed parts because vacuum tubes burned out with frustrating regularity. The famous ENIAC computer, completed in 1945, weighed roughly 30 tons. It contained nearly 18,000 vacuum tubes. When people switched it on, the machine consumed so much electricity that stories spread, some exaggerated, that nearby lights dimmed. Whether or not every story was true hardly mattered. The reputation reflected reality. Computers were expensive, fragile, power-hungry, and enormous. If the future depended on electronics, electronics would somehow have to become dramatically smaller. No one yet knew how. The solution arrived 3,000 miles away, not in California, but in New Jersey, at one of the greatest research laboratories ever created, Bell Telephone Laboratories, better known simply as Bell Labs. During the first half of the 20th century, Bell Labs occupied a unique place in American science. Funded by the Bell telephone system, its researchers enjoyed extraordinary freedom. Some worked on immediate engineering challenges. Others explored questions with no obvious commercial value. Management believed today's curiosity could become tomorrow's necessity. That philosophy produced astonishing results. Researchers at Bell Labs contributed to information theory, satellite communications, lasers, solar cells, operating systems, and many other breakthroughs, yet one invention overshadowed them all: the transistor. Before understanding why it changed history, imagine the challenge engineers faced. Vacuum tubes controlled electrical signals by moving electrons through sealed glass chambers. They worked, but they generated heat. They consumed large amounts of power. They broke easily. And making machines with thousands of them was a maintenance nightmare. Scientists dreamed of finding something solid, something smaller, something cooler, something more reliable. In December 1947, three Bell Labs researchers, John Bardeen, Walter Brattain, and William Shockley, made the breakthrough that would launch the electronic age. Working together, they demonstrated the first practical transistor. Unlike vacuum tubes, transistors used carefully engineered semiconductor materials to control electrical current. No glowing filaments, no fragile glass, no bulky components. The invention looked almost insignificant, yet it accomplished the same basic task while occupying only a tiny fraction of the space. Many historians rank the transistor among the most important inventions in human history. Without it, there would be no smartphones, no laptops, no satellites as we know them, no modern internet, no digital cameras, no artificial intelligence running on powerful computer chips. Civilization quietly crossed a technological threshold in that Bell Labs laboratory. Ironically, however, one of the men behind the breakthrough proved difficult to work with. William Shockley was undeniably brilliant. Few questioned his scientific ability. His colleagues respected his intellect. Eventually, he would share the Nobel Prize in Physics for the invention of the transistor. But brilliance and leadership are not always the same thing. Shockley developed a reputation for being intensely demanding, highly competitive, suspicious of colleagues, at times deeply difficult. Relationships inside Bell Labs deteriorated. Eventually, he began searching for an opportunity to establish his own company. His choice surprised many people. Instead of remaining on the East Coast, where America's electronics industry was concentrated, he moved west to the Santa Clara Valley. Why? Part of the answer was personal. His mother lived in Palo Alto. He had spent time in California growing up. The climate appealed to him. But another reason reflected everything Frederick Terman had spent decades building. By the mid-1950s, Stanford had become one of America's strongest engineering universities. Military research was flourishing. Federal contracts flowed into the region. Talented graduates filled laboratories. The ingredients for a new technology center already existed. Shockley recognized the opportunity. In 1956, he established Shockley Semiconductor Laboratory in Mountain View. At the time, it seemed like a tremendous victory for California. One of the world's greatest physicists had chosen to build his company there. Engineers eagerly accepted positions. Young scientists saw an extraordinary opportunity to learn directly from a Nobel Prize-winning inventor. On paper, everything looked perfect. Reality proved very different. Shockley's management style quickly created problems. He distrusted employees. He frequently changed research priorities. Instead of focusing on the silicon transistor, he became fascinated by other ideas many engineers considered less practical. Morale declined. Communication broke down. Talented researchers grew frustrated. One employee later recalled that working there often felt less like collaboration and more like constant conflict. The irony was remarkable. William Shockley had helped invent the technology that would transform the world. Yet he struggled to build an organization capable of developing it. Then came one of the most important resignations in business history. 8 young scientists decided they had had enough. They respected semiconductor technology. They believed in California. They believed the future belonged to Silicon. They simply no longer believed in William Shockley. The group included Robert Noyce, Gordon Moore, Jan Horney, Julius Blank, Victor Greenwich, Eugene Kleiner, Jay Last, and Sheldon Roberts. Together, they resigned. Shockley felt betrayed. Furious, he referred to them as the traitorous eight. History remembers them rather differently. Finding financial backing wasn't easy. Building a semiconductor company required expensive equipment, precision manufacturing, research laboratories, highly trained engineers. Traditional banks viewed the venture as risky. Fortunately, the eight attracted the attention of an entrepreneur and investor named Sherman Fairchild. Fairchild believed their ideas deserved a chance. His company provided the funding. In 1957, the group founded Fairchild Semiconductor. Few people noticed at the time. Looking back, historians often describe it as one of the most consequential company formations in history. Fairchild quickly developed a culture almost opposite to Shockley's. Ideas flowed more freely. Young engineers received greater responsibility. Collaboration replaced suspicion. Innovation accelerated. Employees weren't afraid to challenge assumptions. Mistakes became opportunities to learn rather than reasons for punishment. That cultural shift proved almost as important as the technology itself. Fairchild became a factory for entrepreneurs, not just semiconductor devices. Over the coming decades, dozens of successful companies would be founded by former Fairchild employees: Intel, Advanced Micro Devices, National Semiconductor, and many others. The region began producing startup founders almost as efficiently as it produced electronic components. The phenomenon became known as the Fairchild family tree. Its influence spread throughout Silicon Valley. At the heart of Fairchild stood two remarkable figures, Robert Noyce and Gordon Moore. Although very different personalities, together they helped define the next era of computing. Noyce possessed unusual charisma. He was approachable, optimistic, able to inspire teams. Unlike some brilliant scientists, he genuinely enjoyed collaboration. Many employees later described him as the kind of leader people wanted to follow. Gordon Moore approached problems differently. Quiet, analytical, methodical, he possessed an extraordinary ability to recognize long-term technological trends. Years later, he would make one of the most famous predictions in business history. Observing improvements in semiconductor manufacturing, Moore noticed that engineers were consistently doubling the number of components that could fit onto a single chip. He predicted this trend would continue. His observation became known as Moore's Law. Strictly speaking, it wasn't a law of physics. It was an observation about human innovation. Yet for decades, it proved astonishingly accurate. Computers became faster, smaller, cheaper, more powerful. Again and again, the modern digital age unfolded according to that rhythm. But another breakthrough at Fairchild proved even more revolutionary: the integrated circuit. Early electronic devices still required numerous separate components connected by wires. Each additional connection increased complexity. Every wire represented another possible failure. The solution was elegant. Instead of manufacturing individual transistors separately, why not create multiple electronic components together on a single piece of semiconductor material? One tiny chip, many interconnected functions. Robert Noyce developed one of the first practical methods for accomplishing exactly that. Around the same time, Jack Kilby at Texas Instruments independently developed a similar concept. Together, their work fundamentally reshaped electronics. Integrated circuits allowed engineers to place increasing amounts of computing power inside incredibly small spaces. This was no incremental improvement. It completely changed the economics of technology. Machines that once filled rooms could eventually fit onto desks, then into briefcases, then into pockets. Today, billions of transistors occupy chips smaller than a postage stamp. That journey began with these early integrated circuits. But why silicon? After all, semiconductors can be made from several different materials. Germanium had initially attracted significant attention. Silicon, however, possessed critical advantages. It was abundant. Much of Earth's crust consists of silicon compounds. Refined correctly, silicon formed stable crystals ideal for semiconductor manufacturing. It also tolerated higher operating temperatures than germanium. Even more importantly, silicon naturally formed a thin layer of silicon dioxide when exposed to oxygen. This seemingly ordinary chemical property became extraordinarily useful. That oxide layer acted as an excellent electrical insulator, allowing engineers to manufacture increasingly sophisticated circuits with remarkable precision. Nature itself had quietly provided one of the key ingredients necessary for modern electronics. The region surrounding Stanford did not receive its famous name because it produced silicon. Silicon exists all over the world. It became Silicon Valley because it became the world's greatest center for transforming silicon into intelligence, into memory, into computation, into possibility. Something else was changing too. The success of Fairchild Semiconductor demonstrated a powerful new pattern. Talented engineers no longer expected to spend entire careers at one company. If they saw a better idea, they left, started another business, raised investment, hired former colleagues. Competition accelerated innovation. This constant movement of people and ideas became one of Silicon Valley's defining characteristics. Unlike older industrial centers where companies often guarded employees closely, Northern California increasingly resembled a living ecosystem. Knowledge spread rapidly. Friendships crossed company boundaries. Lunch conversations sometimes inspired entirely new businesses. One successful startup created dozens more. That culture began, in large part, with the people who walked away from William Shockley. Looking back, the irony is almost poetic. Shockley brought semiconductor technology to California. His leadership drove away the very people who would build its future. Had he managed his company differently, history might have unfolded very differently. Perhaps Fairchild would never have existed. Perhaps Intel would have emerged somewhere else. Perhaps Silicon Valley itself would have developed more slowly. History often turns on moments that seem insignificant at the time. One resignation, one disagreement, one risky decision. The traitorous eight did not know they were creating an industrial revolution. They simply wanted a better place to work. Their decision helped reshape modern civilization. Yet despite all these remarkable breakthroughs, semiconductor companies still faced a fundamental challenge. The technology worked, but it remained incredibly expensive. Ordinary consumers could not afford products built with the latest integrated circuits. Someone had to buy these early chips. Someone wealthy enough to pay premium prices while manufacturers learned how to produce them efficiently. Fortunately for Silicon Valley, one customer possessed almost unlimited resources: the United States government. Once again, Washington would become the invisible force accelerating technological history. But for now, let the laboratories grow quiet and the tiny chips rest silently beneath their bright work lights. Imagine the peaceful Californian night settling over Mountain View and Palo Alto, where the day's discoveries gently fade into stillness. Breathe slowly and deeply, knowing that even the smallest grain of silicon can hold extraordinary possibilities. As your thoughts become lighter and more distant, allow yourself to drift peacefully toward sleep, carried softly through this remarkable chapter of history and into the calm of the night. By the early 1960s, something extraordinary was happening in Northern California. The semiconductor worked. Fairchild Semiconductor was producing increasingly sophisticated integrated circuits. New companies were appearing almost every year. Stanford was graduating some of the brightest engineers in the country. The military wanted better electronics. The scientific community believed the future belonged to silicon. It seemed like success was inevitable. But there was one enormous problem. Nobody could afford the product. Today, computer chips are everywhere. They hide inside televisions, inside washing machines, inside watches, inside children's toys, inside coffee makers, inside cars. Most people never think twice about them because they cost only a few dollars or even a few cents. That wasn't true in 1960. Early integrated circuits were breathtakingly expensive. Manufacturing them required extraordinary precision. Factories were still learning how to produce them consistently. Many chips failed quality tests. Production volumes remained small. Each successful chip represented hundreds of hours of engineering and countless manufacturing challenges. If semiconductor companies had depended entirely on ordinary consumers, many of them might never have survived. No family in 1961 wanted to spend hundreds of dollars for a tiny electronic component whose purpose they barely understood. There simply wasn't a consumer market large enough to sustain the industry. So who kept these companies alive? The answer was hiding in plain sight: the United States government. Not because Washington wanted Americans to own personal computers. Nobody was imagining smartphones or laptops. The government's goals were completely different. It wanted rockets that never lost their way, aircraft that could navigate through storms, satellites that could survive the vacuum of space, missiles capable of extraordinary precision. National security once again became Silicon Valley's biggest customer. One of the most remarkable aspects of technological history is that revolutionary inventions often begin as terrible business ideas. At first, they're too expensive, too unreliable, too unfamiliar. Private investors hesitate. Consumers ignore them. If left entirely to the marketplace, many transformative technologies might disappear before they ever mature. Integrated circuits faced exactly that danger. The breakthrough had occurred, the economics had not. Fortunately for companies like Fairchild, another technological revolution was unfolding simultaneously: the space race. On October 4, 1957, the Soviet Union stunned the world by launching Sputnik, the first artificial satellite. Although the spacecraft itself was relatively simple, its political impact was enormous. Americans looked skyward and realized something unsettling. The Soviet Union had reached space first. If it could launch satellites, it could launch nuclear weapons across continents. The psychological shock was immense. Newspapers called it the Sputnik crisis. Parents worried about America's future. Politicians demanded action. Scientists warned that technological leadership had become essential to national survival. Washington responded with urgency. 1 year later, in 1958, Congress created a new civilian agency, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA. Its mission extended far beyond exploring space. NASA became a symbol, proof that America intended not merely to catch the Soviet Union, but surpass it. Yet reaching the moon required solving engineering problems unlike anything humanity had previously attempted. A spacecraft traveling nearly 240,000 miles to the moon could not rely on mechanical calculators or human guesswork. It needed computers, reliable computers, small computers, powerful computers. Suddenly, integrated circuits looked far more valuable, not because they were inexpensive, but because they were light, reliable, energy efficient. Every kilogram launched into space dramatically increased mission costs. Reducing the size of electronic systems became incredibly important. Vacuum tubes were simply impractical. Transistors represented progress. Integrated circuits represented the future. NASA became one of the earliest major customers willing to purchase these revolutionary chips despite their astonishing price. The Apollo program accelerated this demand even further. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy stood before Congress and announced one of the boldest technological goals in history. America would land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth before the decade ended. At the time, many experts privately questioned whether such a goal was realistic. The United States had barely begun human spaceflight. The necessary technologies did not yet fully exist. The computers required for lunar navigation were still being designed. Engineers would have to invent solutions as they went. That challenge proved extraordinarily beneficial for semiconductor manufacturers. The Apollo guidance computer became one of history's most influential machines. Compared to modern smartphones, it appears almost unbelievably primitive. Its processing power was tiny, its memory was limited, its capabilities seem modest today. Yet in the 1960s, it represented the cutting edge of engineering. More importantly, it became one of the first major systems built using large numbers of integrated circuits. NASA didn't simply purchase chips. It demonstrated that chips could reliably perform under some of the harshest conditions imaginable. Violent rocket launches, extreme temperatures, radiation, the vacuum of space. If integrated circuits could guide astronauts to the moon, engineers reasoned, perhaps they could eventually power countless civilian devices as well. NASA's confidence became a powerful advertisement for the entire industry. But NASA wasn't acting alone. In fact, it wasn't even the largest customer. That distinction often belonged to the Department of Defense. Throughout the Cold War, the Pentagon purchased enormous quantities of advanced electronics. The Air Force needed increasingly sophisticated guidance systems. The Navy required reliable communications equipment. The Army invested in portable electronics. Every branch sought technological advantages. One particularly demanding application involved missile guidance. Imagine launching a missile thousands of miles toward a target. Tiny navigation errors during the early stages of flight become enormous mistakes by the time the missile reaches its destination. Accuracy mattered enormously. Guidance computers had to perform flawlessly. Mechanical systems could only accomplish so much. Integrated circuits offered dramatic improvements. They made computers smaller, faster, more reliable, more resistant to vibration. Defense planners immediately recognized their potential. The Department of Defense became willing to pay prices that commercial buyers simply could not justify. In some cases, early integrated circuits cost dozens of dollars each, sometimes considerably more, at a time when that represented a substantial amount of money. Military budgets absorbed those costs because the alternative could be strategic failure. This created an extraordinary economic situation. Private companies developed advanced technology. Government agencies purchased the earliest, most expensive versions. Manufacturers improved production. Costs gradually declined. Eventually, civilian markets became affordable. Taxpayer money effectively financed the difficult early stages of innovation. Economists sometimes describe this as crossing the valley of death. Many promising technologies fail during the transition between laboratory research and profitable commercial production. The government, intentionally or not, helped semiconductor companies cross that dangerous gap. Another organization played an equally significant role: DARPA, the Advanced Research Projects Agency. Today it is better known as DARPA after the word defense was added to its name. DARPA emerged directly from the Sputnik shock. American leaders worried they had underestimated Soviet scientific capabilities. Rather than reacting slowly to future surprises, they created an agency with unusual freedom. Its mission was simple: fund ambitious ideas before anyone else. Unlike many government organizations, DARPA accepted extraordinary risk. It supported projects that sounded unrealistic. Some failed completely. Others transformed history. Researchers frequently joked that DARPA funded ideas too strange for everyone else. Yet many of those strange ideas eventually became commonplace. The agency invested in advanced computing, artificial intelligence, networking technologies, interactive computing, microelectronics. Many projects initially appeared to have little practical value. Decades later, their influence became obvious. DARPA also operated differently from traditional bureaucracies. Instead of attempting to conduct all research internally, it awarded contracts to universities, laboratories, and private companies. Stanford benefited enormously. So did countless firms surrounding it. This approach strengthened the ecosystem Frederick Terman had envisioned years earlier. Government agencies identified strategic challenges. Universities explored scientific questions. Private companies transformed discoveries into usable technologies. Each depended upon the others. No single institution could accomplish everything alone. As semiconductor production expanded, something remarkable happened. Manufacturing experience accumulated. Engineers discovered better techniques. Factories improved quality. Defect rates declined. Automation increased. Every improvement lowered costs. The effect resembled what economists now call the learning curve. The more chips companies manufactured, the better they became at manufacturing them, and the better they became, the cheaper each chip became. Government demand accelerated this process dramatically. Imagine trying to learn automobile manufacturing by building only 10 cars each year. Progress would be painfully slow. Now imagine producing hundreds of thousands. Problems reveal themselves quickly. Workers gain experience. Machines improve. Costs fall. The same principle applied to integrated circuits. Without large early orders, manufacturers would have learned much more slowly. Taxpayer-funded purchases unintentionally helped create the economies of scale necessary for commercial success. By the late 1960s, prices had fallen dramatically. Integrated circuits that once seemed impossibly expensive gradually entered calculators, industrial equipment, medical devices, scientific instruments, consumer electronics followed. Every reduction in cost expanded the potential market. More customers meant larger factories. Larger factories reduced costs further. A powerful cycle had begun. Silicon Valley companies suddenly found themselves serving two worlds at once. One remained classified: defense, space exploration, national security. The other was just beginning to emerge: commercial electronics. The transition wasn't always obvious. Many engineers moved seamlessly between military and civilian projects. Technologies developed for one application often found unexpected uses elsewhere. A guidance computer inspired improvements in industrial automation. Military communication systems influenced commercial networking. Miniaturized electronics designed for spacecraft eventually appeared inside household products. History rarely divides innovation into neat categories. Ideas travel. Adapt, evolve. This raises an important question. Could Silicon Valley have survived without federal demand? It is impossible to answer with absolute certainty. History offers no alternate timeline, no parallel universe where we can observe what might have happened. Yet the evidence suggests something important. Without government purchases, semiconductors almost certainly would have developed more slowly. Companies like Fairchild faced enormous financial pressures during their earliest years. Private consumer markets were simply too small. Military and space contracts provided steady revenue precisely when the industry needed it most. That does not mean the government created every innovation. Far from it. Engineers still had to invent. Entrepreneurs still took enormous risks. Investors still financed new companies. Managers still built factories. Competition remained fierce. But the federal government served as something equally valuable, an early customer. Perhaps the most important early customer in technological history. Ironically, the average American taxpayer probably had no idea what they were helping to build. They believed their taxes were funding missiles, spacecraft, national defense. In many cases, they were. Yet they were also quietly financing the foundations of personal computing. The smartphone, the laptop, the digital camera, the GPS receiver, the internet. Artificial intelligence. Almost none of those outcomes were the original objective. They emerged because technologies developed for extraordinary circumstances eventually found ordinary uses. This pattern would soon accelerate even further. A new generation of entrepreneurs, many trained at Fairchild Semiconductor, were preparing to create companies unlike anything the world had ever seen. One of them would build a tiny device capable of placing an entire computer onto a single chip. Its name would become synonymous with Silicon Valley itself. Intel, and with it, the age of the personal computer would finally begin. But for now, let the countdown clocks fall silent and the launch pads rest beneath the gentle glow of the evening sky. Imagine the stars above California shining with the same quiet brilliance that inspired engineers to reach beyond Earth, while below, the laboratories settle into peaceful stillness. There is nothing you need to calculate or navigate tonight. Simply breathe slowly, let your shoulders soften, and allow your thoughts to drift as gently as a spacecraft floating through the calm darkness of space. If sleep comes now, let it carry you effortlessly into the next chapter of this remarkable journey. For nearly 3 decades, the story of Silicon Valley had unfolded largely behind closed doors. Engineers built missile guidance systems, scientists designed radar equipment, researchers developed satellite technology, government agencies funded ambitious experiments whose results were often classified. Much of the Valley's greatest work was invisible to ordinary Americans. If you had walked through Palo Alto or Mountain View during the early 1960s, you would not have seen crowds lining up to buy new gadgets. You would have seen engineers carrying briefcases into research laboratories. You would have seen military contractors expanding their campuses. You would have seen university students discussing physics, electronics, and mathematics. The average person had little reason to care about integrated circuits. Most had never even heard the word semiconductor. But that was about to change, not because the government suddenly changed its priorities, but because the technology had finally become affordable enough for entirely new markets. The military had paid for the difficult beginning. Now, private entrepreneurs were preparing to write the next chapter, and this chapter would be visible to everyone. One company stood at the center of this transition. Its story began with two familiar names, Robert Noyce and Gordon Moore. After helping build Fairchild Semiconductor into one of the world's leading electronics companies, both men began growing frustrated. The company had become larger, more bureaucratic, decision-making slowed. Ironically, Fairchild itself was beginning to resemble the kind of organization it had once challenged. Once again, history repeated one of Silicon Valley's favorite patterns. Talented people decided to leave, not because they lacked opportunity, but because they believed they could build something even better. In 1968, Robert Noyce and Gordon Moore founded a new company. They called it Intel. The name came from integrated electronics. At first, Intel focused on semiconductor memory. Computers of the era required enormous amounts of memory, and demand continued growing rapidly. The company quickly established a reputation for technical excellence. Yet Intel's greatest contribution would arrive almost by accident. In 1969, a Japanese calculator manufacturer approached Intel with an unusual request. Instead of designing one custom chip for each function inside a calculator, could Intel create something more flexible? One chip capable of performing many different tasks simply by changing its instructions. It sounded ambitious, perhaps even unrealistic, but Intel engineer Ted Hoff saw an elegant solution. Instead of building specialized hardware for every new machine, why not build a general-purpose computing engine, a single electronic brain? The result became the Intel 4004. Released in 1971, it was the world's first commercially available microprocessor. To modern eyes, its specifications seem almost unbelievable. It contained about 2,300 transistors. It operated at a speed measured in hundreds of kilohertz. A modern smartphone processor contains tens of billions of transistors and performs billions of operations every second. Yet comparing them misses the point. The Intel 4004 represented a completely new idea, an entire central processing unit on a single chip. A computer no longer required cabinets filled with separate circuit boards. Its brain could fit into the palm of your hand. It is difficult to overstate the importance of this breakthrough. The microprocessor turned computing from an industrial activity into something that could eventually become personal. Computers no longer had to belong exclusively to governments, universities, or giant corporations. One day, they might belong to everyone. At almost the same moment, another extraordinary experiment was unfolding only a few miles away. This one inside an organization that few people outside the technology world had heard of, Xerox PARC. Officially known as the Palo Alto Research Center, it opened in 1970. Its parent company, Xerox, had become enormously successful through photocopiers. Executives realized that simply protecting their existing business would not guarantee future success. They wanted researchers free to imagine entirely new ways people might work with information, so they created one of the most remarkable research laboratories in history. Unlike many corporate research centers, PARC encouraged scientists to think decades ahead. There were no immediate product deadlines, no quarterly sales targets. Researchers explored bold ideas simply because they seemed interesting. Inside those buildings, engineers quietly developed technologies that would eventually define modern computing. The computer mouse, graphical user interfaces, Ethernet networking, laser printing, object-oriented programming. What is perhaps most astonishing is that many of these inventions already existed years before the public saw anything similar. Visitors to Park often describe the experience as stepping into the future. One famous saying captured the atmosphere perfectly. The future was already here, it just wasn't evenly distributed. Yet Xerox struggled with a familiar problem. Inventing the future and recognizing its commercial potential are not always the same skill. The company possessed extraordinary ideas. Others would eventually turn many of those ideas into global businesses. One of those visitors arrived in late 1979. His name was Steve Jobs. Jobs was already building a young company called Apple Computer. During his visit to Xerox PARC, he saw demonstrations of graphical interfaces and the computer mouse. The experience left him stunned. Years later, he admitted that he immediately understood their significance. Computers did not need to be controlled only through typed commands. Ordinary people could point, click, move windows around a screen, interact visually. The concept felt revolutionary. Jobs later compared the experience to discovering a hidden treasure. But like many Silicon Valley stories, the truth is more nuanced. Apple did not simply copy Xerox. Its engineers refined, simplified, improved. Most importantly, they transformed laboratory concepts into products ordinary people could actually buy. That ability would become Apple's greatest strength. Meanwhile, another young engineer was solving problems of his own, Steve Wozniak. Unlike Jobs, Wozniak delighted primarily in engineering itself. As a child, he built electronic devices for fun. He loved elegant circuit designs. He admired efficiency. Friends described him as playful, generous, and endlessly curious. Where Jobs excelled at imagining products people would desire, Wozniak excelled at making those products possible. Together, they formed one of the most influential partnerships in business history. One supplied vision. The other supplied extraordinary technical skill. Yet even Apple did not emerge from isolation. It grew out of an increasingly vibrant community. Perhaps no place better represented that community than the Homebrew Computer Club. Beginning in 1975, enthusiasts gathered regularly in Menlo Park to discuss a radical idea. What if computers belonged to individuals instead of institutions? The meetings were unlike traditional business conferences. Engineers freely exchanged ideas. Hobbyists demonstrated homemade machines. Schematics circulated openly. People applauded clever solutions regardless of who invented them. There was an almost utopian belief that computing should become accessible to everyone. Steve Wozniak attended those meetings. So did many future entrepreneurs. The atmosphere reflected something unique about Silicon Valley. Competition existed, but so did collaboration. People shared knowledge remarkably freely. They assumed that better ideas would create even greater opportunities. This openness accelerated innovation in unexpected ways. The Homebrew Computer Club also reflected a broader cultural shift taking place throughout Northern California. The region was changing. The counterculture movements of the 1960s had challenged traditional authority. Young people questioned established institutions. Experimentation became fashionable, not only in politics and art, but in technology. Many engineers no longer dreamed of spending 40 years working for one corporation. They wanted independence. Creativity, freedom, risk no longer seemed frightening. It seemed exciting. This entrepreneurial spirit became one of Silicon Valley's defining characteristics. Yet brilliant ideas alone rarely become successful companies. Someone still had to provide money. Banks remained cautious. Most startup companies possessed little more than prototypes and optimism. Traditional lenders preferred collateral. Entrepreneurs possessed circuit boards. A new financial industry emerged to bridge that gap: venture capital. The concept itself wasn't entirely new. Wealthy investors had financed risky enterprises for centuries. But Northern California developed something different. Professional firms dedicated specifically to funding high-risk technology startups. Instead of demanding immediate profits, venture capitalists accepted uncertainty. They understood that many investments would fail completely. One spectacular success could compensate for numerous disappointments. This approach perfectly matched Silicon Valley's culture. Failure became less frightening because it no longer ended careers. Entrepreneurs whose companies collapsed often found investors willing to support their next idea. Experience, even unsuccessful experience, became valuable. One road became especially famous. Sand Hill Road, bordering Stanford University, gradually filled with venture capital firms. The proximity was no coincidence. Investors wanted to remain close to researchers, close to entrepreneurs, close to ideas before the rest of the world discovered them. Money, talent, and universities formed an increasingly powerful ecosystem. Each strengthened the others. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, something remarkable had happened. The balance of power within Silicon Valley had shifted. Government agencies remained important customers. Defense research continued. NASA still required advanced electronics, but private markets were expanding far more rapidly. Businesses wanted computers. Schools wanted computers. Families wanted computers. Software companies appeared almost overnight. The center of gravity was moving away from classified laboratories and toward commercial innovation. Why did the government step back? The answer is surprisingly simple. It didn't entirely step back, rather, it no longer needed to dominate. Federal investment had helped create the underlying technologies. Semiconductors had matured. Manufacturing costs had fallen. Microprocessors had become commercially viable. Private demand exploded. Market forces now accelerated innovation faster than government procurement alone ever could. Instead of purchasing every new chip, Washington increasingly watched private consumers drive technological progress. Ironically, this was exactly what policymakers had hoped for. Government investment had never been intended to create permanent dependence. Its greatest success was making itself less essential. The marketplace could finally sustain the technologies that public funding had helped nurture. This transition highlights one of the central themes running throughout Silicon Valley's history. Government and private enterprise were never opponents. Neither acted alone. The government often solved the problem of can this technology exist? Entrepreneurs solved the problem of can everyone use it? Military agencies demanded reliability. Private companies demanded affordability. Universities produced knowledge. Businesses transformed knowledge into products. Investors scaled those products around the world. Remove any one of those pieces and the story becomes dramatically different. By the early 1980s, Silicon Valley was no longer merely an important defense research center. It had become something entirely new, a place where ideas could move from university laboratories to startup garages, from venture capital meetings to global markets, often in just a few years. The Valley had discovered its own self-sustaining engine, and it was only beginning. Because another technology, one originally created to protect military communications during the Cold War, was quietly preparing to connect every computer on Earth. The world knew it as a research network. Soon, everyone else would simply call it the Internet. But for now, let the computer screens dim and the workshops become still. Imagine a quiet garage in California after midnight, the soldering iron cooling, circuit boards resting on a wooden bench, and the gentle hum of possibility lingering in the air. There is nothing left to build tonight. Let your breathing become slow and peaceful, your thoughts as light as the evening breeze drifting through the valley. As tomorrow's inventions wait patiently for another sunrise, you can simply relax, close your eyes, and let sleep gently carry you onward. Today, the internet feels almost as natural as electricity. You wake up, check your phone, read messages, browse the news, watch videos, order groceries, navigate traffic, pay bills, or ask an artificial intelligence to answer a question. For billions of people, the internet is simply part of everyday life. It's difficult to imagine a world without it. But here's the surprising truth. The internet was never designed for shopping. It wasn't built for social media. It wasn't created so people could stream movies, post vacation photos, or watch cat videos. In fact, the first people who worked on what became the internet probably would have found today's online world almost impossible to imagine. The original goal was far more serious. Survival, more specifically, survival during the Cold War. By the late 1960s, the rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union had reached extraordinary levels. Both nations possessed thousands of nuclear weapons. Military planners constantly asked disturbing questions. What would happen if a nuclear attack destroyed major communication centers? How could military commanders continue coordinating forces if telephone networks were damaged? How could information continue flowing if parts of the country suddenly disappeared from the map? Traditional communication systems had one major weakness. They depended on central control. Imagine an old-fashioned telephone network. If a key switching center failed, enormous portions of the network could stop functioning. That might be inconvenient during peacetime. During nuclear war, it could be catastrophic. American defense planners wanted something different. A communication system with no single point of failure. A network capable of surviving even if large sections were destroyed. The challenge eventually landed on the desks of researchers at DARPA. By then, the agency had become famous for funding ambitious ideas that other organizations considered too experimental. Engineers began asking a revolutionary question. What if messages didn't travel through one fixed route? What if they could find their own way? At first, the idea sounded almost impossible. Yet hidden within that question was one of the greatest technological breakthroughs of the 20th century: packet switching. Before packet switching, communication generally resembled a dedicated conversation. Imagine making a traditional telephone call. A single connection is established between two people. That connection remains open until the conversation ends. It works well for voice. But computers communicate differently. They exchange information in bursts. Sometimes they need to send large amounts of data. Sometimes only a few characters. Researchers realize something elegant. Instead of sending one continuous stream of information, why not divide every message into many small pieces? Packets. Each packet could travel independently. If one route became unavailable, packets could simply travel another. When they reached their destination, computers would reassemble them into the original message. It sounds obvious today. At the time, it represented an extraordinary leap in thinking. Communication no longer depended on one fragile pathway. The network itself became intelligent. If damage occurred, information simply flowed around it, like water finding another route downstream. This concept dramatically increased resilience, exactly what military planners wanted. In 1969, DARPA launched the first version of this new network. ARPANET, its initial size seems almost laughably small by today's standards. The first 4 connected computers belonged to universities. The University of California, Los Angeles, the Stanford Research Institute, today known as SRI International, the University of California, Santa Barbara, and the University of Utah. That was the entire network. 4 machines, Yet those 4 machines quietly marked the birth of a new era. The first message ever sent across ARPANET has become legendary. Researchers at UCLA attempted to log into the computer at Stanford. They typed the letter L, success, then the letter O, success again. Next came the letter G. The system crashed. The first internet message in history was simply low. Some people enjoy pointing out that low resembles the beginning of the word login. Others joke that it resembles the Old English word meaning behold. Either way, history often begins with surprisingly modest moments. Within an hour, engineers solved the problem. The connection worked. A new kind of communication had entered the world. Throughout the early 1970s, ARPANET expanded steadily. More universities joined, government laboratories connected, researchers exchanged software, scientists collaborated across enormous distances. The network wasn't public. Access remained limited. Most Americans had never heard of it, those who had generally considered it an obscure research tool. Yet inside universities, something fascinating was happening. The network encouraged collaboration, unlike anything researchers had previously experienced. Instead of mailing magnetic tapes or printed documents, information moved electronically. Ideas spread faster, projects accelerated, knowledge became easier to share. Distance mattered less than ever before. Northern California occupied a privileged position within this growing ecosystem. Stanford SRI, the University of California at Berkeley, the growing technology companies surrounding them, all became deeply connected to these emerging research networks. Silicon Valley wasn't merely using the early internet, it was helping shape it. Yet ARPANET still faced a challenge. Other experimental networks were appearing around the world. How could they communicate with one another? Connecting computers was useful. Connecting networks would be revolutionary. The solution emerged through the work of 2 remarkable computer scientists, Vinton Cerf and Robert Kahn. Working during the 1970s, they developed a new communication language, a common set of rules allowing completely different networks to exchange information. Today we know it as TCP/IP, Transmission Control Protocol, Internet Protocol. The names sound technical. Their importance cannot be overstated. Think of TCP/IP as a universal language. Imagine every country speaking completely different languages. International communication would be difficult. Now imagine everyone agreeing on one common system whenever they needed to communicate globally. That's essentially what TCP/IP accomplished for computers. Different machines, different manufacturers, different operating systems, different networks, all could now exchange information. On January 1st, 1983, ARPANET officially adopted TCP/IP. Many historians consider this moment the true birth of the modern Internet. Separate networks became one interconnected network, an Internet, literally a network of networks. Ironically, almost nobody outside scientific circles noticed. The world continued largely unaware. Most people still viewed computers as intimidating office machines. The Internet remained something researchers used. Then another government decision unexpectedly expanded everything. In the mid-1980s, the National Science Foundation recognized that universities beyond defense research also needed advanced networking. The organization created NSFNet. Instead of limiting high-speed networking primarily to military-funded institutions, NSFNet connected universities across America. Students gained access. Professors collaborated nationally. Scientific knowledge flowed more freely. The network grew dramatically. Again, taxpayer funding quietly expanded technological infrastructure. What had begun as a military communication experiment gradually became an academic community. Thousands of researchers now depended upon digital connectivity, yet ordinary families still remained outside the system. The internet existed. Most people simply had no reason to use it. That would soon change. As semiconductor costs declined and personal computers entered homes, a new question emerged. Why should only universities enjoy networked communication? Private companies began recognizing commercial possibilities. Electronic mail could transform business. Digital file transfers could reduce costs. Online databases could improve productivity. Throughout the late 1980s, restrictions on commercial use gradually relaxed. The transition happened carefully. Government agencies had never intended to operate a permanent public communication network. Private companies increasingly assumed responsibility. Internet service providers appeared, businesses connected, the public slowly followed. This marked another important shift in Silicon Valley's history. Once again, technologies originally funded for national security escaped into civilian life. Private innovation accelerated. Competition intensified. Entrepreneurs built services ordinary people actually wanted. Then, in 1989, another breakthrough occurred thousands of miles away at CERN in Switzerland. A British scientist named Tim Berners-Lee proposed a remarkably simple idea. What if documents across the internet could link directly to one another? Instead of memorizing complex computer addresses, users could simply click highlighted words. The concept became the World Wide Web. Notice something important. The internet and the World Wide Web are not the same thing. The internet is the global network. The web is one way of navigating it. It's similar to the difference between highways and automobiles. Highways exist independently. Cars make them useful. Even after the web appeared, another obstacle remained. Most people still found internet software confusing. Commands had to be typed. Navigation required technical knowledge. The technology desperately needed simplicity. That breakthrough came from another university. At the National Center for Supercomputing Applications in Illinois, a team led by Mark Andreessen helped develop Mosaic. Released in 1993, Mosaic became one of the first widely popular graphical web browsers. For the first time, ordinary people could explore the web using pictures, buttons, and clickable links. No advanced computer science degree required. Andreessen soon moved west to Silicon Valley. There, he co-founded Netscape Communications. Its browsers spread across the world at astonishing speed. Almost overnight, the internet transformed from an academic network into a commercial frontier. Thousands of entrepreneurs sensed opportunity: online bookstores, search engines, auction websites, email companies, news services. Every month seemed to produce another startup. Silicon Valley became the center of this explosion, not because it had invented every internet technology, but because it possessed something few places could match. Engineers, investors, universities, entrepreneurs, experience, and perhaps most importantly, confidence. The Valley had already learned how to transform government-funded research into commercial success. Semiconductors had followed that path. Microprocessors had followed that path. Now the internet would do the same. Looking back, the transformation almost seems inevitable. It wasn't. It required thousands of decisions by scientists, engineers, policymakers, entrepreneurs, and investors spread across decades. So how did a military communication project become the modern internet? The answer lies in a chain of unintended consequences. The military wanted resilient communications. Universities wanted collaboration. Scientists wanted knowledge sharing. Businesses wanted efficiency. Entrepreneurs wanted opportunity. Consumers wanted convenience. Each group inherited technology built for someone else's purpose, then adapted it, improved it, expanded it, until eventually the original mission almost disappeared beneath countless new uses. Very few people browsing the internet today think about Cold War communications or nuclear deterrence. Yet, those concerns help shape the network connecting billions of people every single day. It is another reminder that history rarely follows a straight line. The technologies designed for extraordinary circumstances often become ordinary parts of everyday life. And now, with semiconductors becoming cheaper, personal computers entering millions of homes, and the internet preparing to connect the world, Silicon Valley stood on the edge of its greatest transformation yet. The age of startups had truly arrived. And with it came a new force that would make the Valley unlike any innovation center the world had ever seen. An endless cycle of entrepreneurs, investors, talent, and risk. But for now, let the streams of information slow to a gentle trickle, like quiet rivers finding their peaceful way through the night. Imagine distant computer screens softly dimming across university campuses, while above them the stars shine silently over California. There is no need to send another message or follow another connection tonight. Simply let your breathing become calm and steady. Allow your thoughts to drift like tiny packets carried effortlessly through the darkness, and rest peacefully as this remarkable journey continues toward its next chapter. If you had visited Silicon Valley in the early 1950s, you would have seen government laboratories, defense contractors, university researchers, military officers, scientists working on classified projects. The federal government was everywhere. If you returned 30 years later, the landscape would look completely different. The government hadn't disappeared. Defense contracts still mattered. NASA still funded research. Military technology remained an important part of the region. But something far more powerful had emerged. Silicon Valley no longer needed Washington to tell it what to invent. It had learned how to invent on its own. More importantly, it had learned how to finance those inventions. That transformation may have been the Valley's greatest achievement, because governments can launch industries, but only ecosystems can sustain them. And Silicon Valley had quietly become the world's most successful innovation ecosystem. The heart of that ecosystem wasn't a laboratory, it wasn't a university, it wasn't even a technology company. It was a surprisingly ordinary stretch of road. Sand Hill Road. Drive along it today, and you might wonder why people speak about it with such reverence. There are no towering skyscrapers, no spectacular monuments, no famous factories. Instead, you'll find elegant office buildings tucked among trees and rolling hills just west of Stanford University. It looks peaceful, almost understated. Yet behind those doors, decisions have been made that shaped the digital economy. Companies that eventually became household names once walked into conference rooms on Sand Hill Road carrying little more than a prototype, a dream, and a business plan. Google, Yahoo, Netscape, PayPal, Facebook, thousands of others. Many of the world's most influential technology companies received their earliest financial backing within a few miles of Stanford's campus. Why here? The answer reaches back to everything we've explored throughout this documentary. Stanford produced talented engineers. Government contracts built advanced research. Defense spending attracted technology companies. Successful entrepreneurs accumulated wealth. Some eventually became investors. Success generated more success. The ecosystem fed itself. This was venture capital. At first glance, venture capital seems simple. Investors provide money to young companies, If the company succeeds, everyone benefits. If it fails, investors lose money. But Silicon Valley reinvented the model. Traditional investors often searched for safe opportunities, steady profits, reliable businesses, predictable growth. Venture capitalists almost did the opposite. They deliberately searched for uncertainty. The bigger the risk, the greater the potential reward. This seemed irrational to outsiders. Why invest millions of dollars in companies with no profits? Sometimes no products? Occasionally, not even customers? The answer lay in mathematics. Imagine investing in 10 startup companies. Perhaps 6 fail completely. 2 survive but remain modest businesses. 1 becomes reasonably successful. Then 1 transforms the world. That single success could return hundreds or even thousands of times the original investment. It could compensate for every previous loss. Silicon Valley accepted failure because it understood probability. The goal wasn't perfection. It was finding the extraordinary. This changed how entrepreneurs thought about risk. In much of the world, business failure carried lasting social consequences. A failed company could permanently damage someone's reputation. Future investors might avoid them. Banks might refuse loans. Employers might hesitate to hire them. Silicon Valley gradually developed a different philosophy. Failure became education. Investors often asked founders an unusual question: what did you learn? Not why did you fail? Experience itself became valuable. Someone who had already navigated the chaos of launching a company, even unsuccessfully, often understood problems first-time founders had never encountered. This attitude encouraged experimentation. People attempted ambitious ideas because failure no longer meant the end of their careers. It often became the beginning of another. That cultural difference proves surprisingly important. Innovation requires taking risks. Most risky ideas fail. If failure becomes unacceptable, people stop attempting bold ideas. Silicon Valley created an environment where intelligent failure remained acceptable. Not careless failure, not dishonesty, but thoughtful experimentation. This produced an extraordinary amount of innovation. Another incentive quietly reshaped the relationship between companies and employees: stock options. Instead of paying engineers only salaries, many startups offered ownership. Employees received the right to purchase company shares at favorable prices. If the company succeeded, even relatively junior workers could become financially independent. This changed motivation dramatically. Engineers weren't merely building products for someone else's business. They were helping build something they partially owned. Every improvement increased the value of their own future. The effect spread throughout the valley. When successful companies went public, thousands of employees suddenly possessed substantial wealth. Many retired early. Others became angel investors. Some founded entirely new companies. The money stayed within the ecosystem. Success financed the next generation of entrepreneurs. History repeated itself again and again. Fairchild Semiconductor produced Intel. Intel employees helped launch dozens of startups. Those startups generated new founders, new investors, new ideas. The valley became a kind of economic family tree. Knowledge spread almost as quickly as money, perhaps even faster. Geography also continued playing its quiet but essential role. Sand Hill Road sat only minutes from Stanford University. Students could attend lectures in the morning, meet investors in the afternoon, interview with startups before dinner. Professors often advised companies. Company founders returned to campus as guest speakers. Researchers discussed ideas over coffee with venture capitalists. The distance between invention and investment became incredibly short. Physical proximity mattered. Even in the digital age, innovation often begins through conversations, chance meetings, unexpected introductions, a recommendation from a trusted colleague. The Valley's density accelerated all of these. But Silicon Valley's greatest natural resource wasn't silicon. It was people. And increasingly, those people came from around the world. America had long attracted immigrants seeking opportunity. Silicon Valley amplified that tradition. Engineers arrived from India, China, Taiwan, South Korea, Iran, Israel, Europe, Latin America. Many came to study at Stanford or Berkeley. Others joined technology companies directly. Some eventually founded businesses themselves. Their backgrounds differed enormously. Their languages varied. Their cultures were diverse. Yet they shared one powerful characteristic. They believed the future could be built. This global flow of talent became one of Silicon Valley's greatest competitive advantages. The Valley did not simply export technology, it imported ambition. Many immigrants were willing to take extraordinary risks because they had already taken one of life's greatest risks. They had left familiar homes to begin again. Starting a company seemed less intimidating after crossing an ocean. Statistics eventually reflected this reality. A remarkably high percentage of Silicon Valley startups were founded or co-founded by immigrants. The Valley became not only an American story, but an international one. People arrived with different perspectives, different educational experiences, different approaches to solving problems. Innovation often flourishes when ideas from different cultures collide. Stanford remained at the center of this remarkable network. The university no longer functioned merely as a place of education. It became a meeting point. Students met future co-founders. Researchers met investors. Professors advised entrepreneurs. Executives recruited graduates. Many of Silicon Valley's most important relationships began inside classrooms or university laboratories. Frederick Terman's original vision had expanded beyond anything he could have imagined. Stanford wasn't simply producing engineers. It was producing communities. California itself contributed something less tangible but equally important: lifestyle. For much of the 20th century, America's financial power centered in New York. Political power centered in Washington. Manufacturing power spread across the Midwest. California offered something different: sunshine, open space, mountains, the Pacific Ocean. A culture that encouraged experimentation. Young entrepreneurs could work intensely while believing they were also creating a different kind of life. Many famously worked long hours, yet weekends might involve surfing, hiking, cycling, or simply gathering with friends to discuss impossible ideas. The relaxed atmosphere contrasted sharply with older corporate cultures. Clothing became casual. Hierarchies softened. Executives often looked little different from interns. Ideas mattered more than titles. This wasn't universally true, of course. Silicon Valley could also be intensely competitive. Pressure was enormous. Working hours were often exhausting. Companies rose and collapsed with astonishing speed. But the culture rewarded originality more than conformity. A graduate in genes with an unusual idea might receive serious attention. That wasn't common in much of corporate America during the 1970s and 1980s. Networks became another invisible strength. Technology companies rarely existed in isolation. Engineers changed employers. Founders recommended former colleagues. Investors introduced entrepreneurs to lawyers, accountants, manufacturers, recruiters, and customers. One successful company often generated dozens of future collaborations. Trust accumulated over time. Reputation spread quickly. This network effect became self-reinforcing. The more successful the ecosystem became, the more talented people wanted to join it. The more talented people arrived, the stronger the ecosystem became. Economists sometimes describe this as agglomeration. Businesses performing similar work naturally cluster together because everyone benefits from shared talent, suppliers, knowledge, and infrastructure. Hollywood became the center of American filmmaking. Detroit once became the center of automobile manufacturing. Wall Street became synonymous with finance. Silicon Valley became the center of technological entrepreneurship, not because geography alone determined the outcome, but because success attracted more success. This also explains why other regions struggled to copy Silicon Valley. Many governments attempted to build their own versions. They constructed technology parks, funded research centers, offered tax incentives. Some achieved impressive results. Yet reproducing Silicon Valley proved extraordinarily difficult. Because the valley wasn't built by one ingredient. It emerged from decades of interaction between universities, government investment, military demand, immigration, entrepreneurship, venture capital, and culture. Remove any one element, and the system changes. This brings us back to one of the central questions of this documentary. Did the U.S. government secretly create Silicon Valley? By now, the answer has become more nuanced. The government unquestionably played a foundational role. Federal contracts supported universities. Defense spending financed early semiconductor production. NASA accelerated integrated circuits. DARPA funded networking research. Without those investments, Silicon Valley would almost certainly have developed more slowly. Perhaps very differently. But by the 1980s, something remarkable had happened. Government investment had evolved into private momentum. The ecosystem no longer depended on constant direction from Washington. Entrepreneurs inspired entrepreneurs. Employees became founders. Founders became investors. Investors financed new dreamers. Universities continuously supplied fresh talent. Immigrants continuously supplied fresh perspectives. Competition continuously generated fresh ideas. The machine had become self-sustaining. And it was about to produce companies whose influence would extend far beyond California. Companies that would reshape communication, commerce, entertainment, transportation, and eventually even artificial intelligence. The government had helped build the runway. Now private innovation was preparing to take flight on its own. But for now, leave the busy offices of Sand Hill Road behind and imagine the valley resting beneath a peaceful blanket of stars. The meetings are over, the notebooks are closed, and tomorrow's bold ideas can wait until morning. Let your breathing become slow and steady, releasing every lingering thought with each gentle exhale. There is nowhere you need to be and nothing you need to invent tonight. Simply relax, allow your eyes to grow heavy, and drift comfortably into deep, restful sleep as the story quietly continues beyond the horizon. For more than a century, millions of people have searched for a simple explanation. Why did Silicon Valley happen here? Why not New York? Why not Chicago? Why not Boston? Why not London, Paris, Tokyo, or Berlin? How did one relatively small stretch of Northern California become the birthplace of companies that transformed nearly every aspect of modern life? Depending on whom you ask, you'll hear very different answers. Some insist it was all because of brilliant entrepreneurs. Others argue it was venture capital. Some point to Stanford University. Others believe California's culture made the difference. Still others claim that without military spending, Silicon Valley would never have existed at all. Each explanation contains part of the truth. None tells the entire story. And that brings us back to the question we have been asking since the beginning. Did the U.S. government secretly create Silicon Valley? The answer depends on what we mean by create. If the question is whether Washington sat down with a master plan to build the world's greatest commercial technology center, the answer is no. There was no secret blueprint stored inside a Pentagon vault, no classified document announcing that the Santa Clara Valley would someday become home to companies like Apple, Intel, Google, or countless others. Nobody in Washington during the 1940s or 1950s was thinking about smartphones. Nobody was trying to create social media. Nobody imagined online shopping, cloud computing, or artificial intelligence serving hundreds of millions of people. Those ideas belonged to a future that had not yet arrived. But if the question is whether decades of federal investment created the conditions that allowed Silicon Valley to emerge, then the evidence becomes much harder to ignore. Because nearly every major chapter of this story includes the federal government, not always at the center, but almost always somewhere in the background. Let's begin with education. Long before Silicon Valley became famous, Stanford University was already changing. Frederick Terman believed California should stop exporting its brightest students. Instead of sending talented engineers east, he encouraged them to remain close to Stanford. That vision mattered enormously. But vision alone could not build world-class laboratories. Federal research funding helped make them possible. Military contracts expanded engineering departments. Research grants purchased equipment. Government-sponsored projects attracted exceptional faculty members. Students learned using tools that many universities could only dream about. Without those investments, Stanford might have remained an excellent regional university. Instead, it became one of the world's leading centers of engineering and computer science. Education created talent. Talent attracted opportunity. Opportunity attracted investment. The chain had begun. Next came defense. This may be the most misunderstood part of Silicon Valley's history. When people hear the phrase defense spending, many imagine tanks, aircraft, and soldiers. They rarely picture computer chips. Yet during the Cold War, national security depended increasingly on electronics, missile guidance, satellite communications, radar, navigation, reconnaissance, secure communications, computing. These challenges demanded technologies that private markets simply were not prepared to finance. The Pentagon became an unusually patient customer. It purchased products that were expensive, experimental, sometimes unfinished. That early demand kept many young technology companies alive. Integrated circuits are perhaps the clearest example. When semiconductor manufacturing began, chips were far too expensive for ordinary consumers. Private markets alone could not support large-scale production. Government agencies, including NASA and the Department of Defense, became the first major buyers. Their purchases gave manufacturers time to improve production techniques. As manufacturing improved, costs fell. As costs fell, civilian markets expanded. The smartphone in your pocket owes part of its ancestry to that economic process. The government did not invent every chip. Engineers did, but government demand allowed the industry to survive long enough for private demand to emerge. The same pattern appears again with networking. ARPANET was never intended to become Facebook. It was never intended to become YouTube. It certainly was never intended to become online shopping. Military planners simply wanted resilient communications. Researchers wanted better collaboration. Universities wanted connected computers. Private entrepreneurs later recognized commercial possibilities that the original designers never imagined. Innovation rarely follows the intentions of its creators. Instead, technologies evolve. They escape their original purpose. They become tools for entirely different generations. This has happened repeatedly throughout history. The steam engine was developed to pump water from mines before transforming transportation. GPS began as a military navigation system before guiding everyday drivers around traffic. The internet followed the same path. Military necessity became civilian convenience. Then there were universities, not just Stanford, but Berkeley, MIT, Carnegie Mellon, and dozens of others. Federal funding strengthened the entire American research system after World War II. Graduate students became researchers, professors became innovators, laboratories became engines of discovery. Universities stopped functioning solely as places where knowledge was preserved. They became places where new knowledge was constantly created. Silicon Valley benefited enormously from that transformation. But this is where an important distinction appears. Government investment created possibilities. Private individuals decided what to do with them. Frederick Terman persuaded students to stay in California. William Shockley's difficult management unintentionally encouraged the creation of Fairchild Semiconductor. Robert Noyce and Gordon Moore founded Intel. Steve Wozniak designed elegant computers. Steve Jobs imagined products that ordinary people would love. Countless founders risked everything to launch companies that might never succeed. The government cannot manufacture entrepreneurship. It can support education, fund research, purchase technology, build infrastructure. But it cannot force someone to leave a secure job and gamble years of their life on an uncertain dream. That decision belongs to individuals. Investors played an equally irreplaceable role. Once technologies became commercially viable, venture capital accelerated innovation in ways government agencies never could. Federal grants often fund research. Venture capital funds ambition. The two perform different functions. One asks, can this technology exist? The other asks, can this become a global business? Silicon Valley needed both. Without government investment, many technologies might never have matured. Without private investment, many technologies would have remained inside laboratories. The Valley succeeded because both systems reinforced each other rather than competing. Then there is immigration. This chapter of the story is sometimes overlooked, yet it may be among the most important. For decades, talented people from every corner of the world arrived in California. Some escaped war, others pursued education. Many simply searched for opportunity. They brought different experiences, different perspectives, different ways of solving problems. Walk through Silicon Valley today, and you will hear dozens of languages spoken inside engineering offices. That diversity did not weaken innovation. It strengthened it. Ideas improve when they collide with other ideas. The government could build universities, but it could not predict the extraordinary creativity that millions of individuals from different cultures would contribute. Culture itself deserves equal attention. Silicon Valley developed unusual social norms. Failure became acceptable. Changing jobs became normal. Young founders challenged older companies. Executives dressed casually. Ideas often mattered more than hierarchy. These values were not written into federal legislation. They evolved gradually through thousands of interactions between entrepreneurs, engineers, investors, professors, and employees. Culture cannot easily be copied. It grows over time. Geography also quietly influenced every stage of the story. The Santa Clara Valley possessed open land for expansion. It enjoyed a mild climate. Stanford stood nearby. Defense contractors clustered together. Venture capital settled only minutes away. Universities, startups, investors, suppliers, and customers all existed within short driving distances. People met frequently. Ideas spread rapidly. Innovation accelerated because conversations happened naturally. Clusters matter. Hollywood did not become Hollywood by accident. Wall Street did not become Wall Street by accident. Silicon Valley did not become Silicon Valley by accident either. Success attracted more success. Yet there is another ingredient that rarely appears in official reports: luck. History often depends upon events nobody plans. What if William Shockley had been an outstanding manager? Would Fairchild Semiconductor have formed? Would Intel exist? What if Sputnik had never been launched? Would federal investment in electronics have accelerated as rapidly? What if Stanford had been built somewhere else? What if Frederick Terman had accepted a permanent position on the East Coast? What if venture capital firms had concentrated in another city? Small events sometimes redirect enormous histories. Silicon Valley benefited from remarkable timing. The semiconductor revolution, the Cold War, the space race, the rise of personal computing, the Internet. Each wave arrived before the previous one had fully ended. Momentum accumulated. The Valley repeatedly found itself prepared for the next technological transformation. No planner could have designed that sequence perfectly. History simply unfolded that way. So what lessons does this story offer today? Around the world, governments are trying to answer the same question that American leaders unknowingly answered decades ago. How do you build the next Silicon Valley? China has invested enormous resources into semiconductor manufacturing, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and advanced manufacturing. India has become one of the world's great software and startup centers, supported by a vast engineering workforce and expanding digital infrastructure. South Korea transformed itself into a global technology powerhouse through decades of investment in education, electronics, and industrial policy. European countries continue investing heavily in research universities, clean technology, advanced manufacturing, and innovation clusters. Each nation hopes to become home to the next generation of world-changing companies. Can they succeed? Certainly, but history suggests an important lesson. Technology ecosystems cannot simply be ordered into existence. Governments can finance research, build universities, improve infrastructure, protect intellectual property, encourage investment, support scientific education. Those foundations matter enormously. But they are only foundations. Someone still has to invent. Someone still has to take risks. Someone still has to leave a secure career to pursue an uncertain idea. Someone still has to build products people actually want. Markets remain essential. Competition remains essential. Failure remains essential. The most successful innovation ecosystems emerge when public investment and private initiative reinforce one another rather than replacing one another. That may be Silicon Valley's greatest lesson. Not that governments create innovation, not that markets create innovation, but that extraordinary progress often happens when both play to their strengths. Government can patiently fund long-term research that private investors might avoid. Entrepreneurs can recognize opportunities that governments never anticipate. Universities generate knowledge. Businesses transform knowledge into products. Investors scale those products across the world. Engineers solve problems. Immigrants bring fresh perspectives. Culture rewards experimentation. Geography concentrates talent. Luck occasionally opens unexpected doors. Remove any one of these elements, and the story becomes less remarkable. Put them together over several decades, and the result can change civilization. So, did the U.S. government secretly create Silicon Valley? Not in the way conspiracy theories often suggest. There was no hidden master plan. No secret committee designing the digital age. But there was something perhaps even more fascinating. Decades of public investment in research, defense, higher education, and infrastructure unintentionally created fertile ground. Into that ground came professors with bold ideas, engineers with extraordinary talent, immigrants seeking opportunity, entrepreneurs willing to gamble everything, investors prepared to finance impossible dreams. Together, they built something no single institution could have created alone. Perhaps that is the real story of Silicon Valley. Not the triumph of government, not the triumph of private enterprise, but the remarkable and often accidental partnership between the two. It began in quiet orchards beneath the California sun. It grew through war, competition, curiosity, and courage. And from those unlikely beginnings emerged technologies that reshaped how billions of people live, work, learn, communicate, and imagine the future. The Valley's greatest invention was never just the microchip. It was the ecosystem itself. And now, as our journey through the hidden history of Silicon Valley comes gently to a close, let the lights of the laboratories, universities, and startup garages slowly fade into the quiet California night. The rush of innovation can wait until another day. For this moment, there is only stillness. Let your breathing become slow and effortless. Feel your shoulders relax, your thoughts grow lighter, and your mind drift peacefully across the calm orchards where this extraordinary story first began. The questions have been answered, the journey is complete, and all that remains is the quiet comfort of rest. Close your eyes, let the world grow wonderfully distant, and allow yourself to fall into a deep, peaceful sleep. When most people think about Silicon Valley, one image usually comes to mind. A garage, a couple of young engineers, a brilliant idea, and a company that changes the world. It is a wonderful story, simple, inspiring, easy to remember, and in many ways completely true. Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak really did begin in a garage. Hewlett and Packard really did build one of America's greatest companies in a small workshop behind a modest home. Many legendary startups truly did begin with little more than a handful of people chasing an impossible dream. But as we've discovered throughout this journey, the garage is only the final chapter of a much longer story. Long before the garage came the university. Long before the university came government investment. Long before venture capital came military research. Long before smartphones came radar. Long before social media came missile guidance systems. Long before online shopping came the Cold War. History has a remarkable habit of hiding its deepest connections. The technologies we use every day often began their lives solving completely different problems. The internet wasn't designed for entertainment. GPS wasn't created to help tourists find restaurants. Integrated circuits weren't invented so children could play video games. Even artificial intelligence, one of today's most transformative technologies, owes much of its rapid progress to decades of publicly funded research, university laboratories, military computing, and private companies building upon one another's discoveries. Innovation is rarely born in isolation. It grows through layers. Each generation inherits tools created by the generation before it. Then, those tools become the foundation for something entirely unexpected. That may be the greatest lesson hidden beneath Silicon Valley's success. The myth of the lone genius is powerful because it celebrates human creativity, and creativity certainly matters. Without individuals willing to challenge convention, history would move much more slowly. Frederick Terman imagined a different future for Stanford. Robert Noyce imagined a different kind of semiconductor company. Gordon Moore imagined a future where computing power would continue growing for decades. Steve Wozniak imagined a computer that ordinary people could own. Steve Jobs imagined that ordinary people would actually want one. Thousands of founders imagined products nobody else believed were necessary. Every technological revolution begins with imagination. But imagination alone is never enough. Even the brightest mind depends upon teachers, upon mentors, upon laboratories, upon investors, upon manufacturers, upon suppliers, upon customers, upon governments willing to invest in long-term research, upon universities willing to educate the next generation, upon engineers willing to solve problems no one else notices. The lone genius almost never stands alone. Instead, they stand upon an invisible foundation built by countless others. Perhaps that explains why Silicon Valley has always been more than a collection of successful companies. It is a network, a conversation stretching across generations. Ideas pass from professor to student, from student to startup, from startup to global corporation, from one company to another, from one generation to the next. Knowledge rarely remains inside a single building. It spreads, adapts, improves. One breakthrough inspires another. One success finances the next. One failure teaches lessons that future entrepreneurs quietly absorb. Innovation behaves less like a straight line and more like a growing forest. No single tree creates the ecosystem. The ecosystem allows thousands of trees to grow. That ecosystem itself emerged through an extraordinary convergence of events. World War II accelerated scientific research on a scale never seen before. The Cold War created urgency unlike anything previous generations had experienced. Fear of falling behind the Soviet Union encouraged enormous investments in education, engineering, and advanced technology. Universities became engines of discovery. Defense contracts sustained young companies. NASA demanded impossible engineering achievements. DARPA funded ideas that sounded unrealistic. Private investors recognized commercial opportunities hiding inside military technologies. Immigrants arrived from around the world carrying different perspectives and ambitions. Entrepreneurs transformed scientific breakthroughs into products that changed everyday life. None of these forces alone created Silicon Valley. Together, they became something greater than the sum of their parts. Looking back, it almost feels inevitable. Yet it wasn't. History is full of places that seemed destined for greatness but never achieved it. Likewise, history is filled with ordinary places that unexpectedly transformed the world. The Santa Clara Valley once grew apricots, cherries, walnuts, and plums. Few people could have imagined that its orchards would someday give way to companies designing the future of civilization. Even the people living there likely wouldn't have believed it. That realization invites another question. If Silicon Valley once looked ordinary, what ordinary place today might become tomorrow's center of innovation? Some believe the answer lies in artificial intelligence. Others point toward quantum computing. Some focus on biotechnology. Others see the future in renewable energy, robotics, advanced manufacturing, or commercial space exploration. Around the world, governments are investing billions of dollars into semiconductor fabrication plants. Universities are expanding engineering programs. Private investors are searching for the next revolutionary startup. Entire nations hope to lead the next technological age. In many ways, the race resembles the early years of Silicon Valley. Only now the competition is global. Artificial intelligence offers perhaps the clearest example. Today's most advanced AI systems did not emerge from one company working alone. Their roots stretch back decades. Government-funded mathematics, university computer science departments, public research grants, open scientific collaboration, private investment, powerful semiconductor manufacturing, cloud computing infrastructure, thousands of researchers contributing ideas across generations. Just like Silicon Valley itself, artificial intelligence is the product of an ecosystem rather than a single invention. The same is true for the renewed race into space. Private companies now launch rockets that would have seemed impossible only a generation ago. Yet many rely upon decades of scientific knowledge first developed through national space programs. Commercial innovation and public investment continue moving forward together. The partnership has changed, but it has not disappeared. Semiconductors remain another reminder. The tiny chips inside modern computers represent one of the most sophisticated manufacturing achievements in human history. Producing them requires extraordinary cooperation between governments, universities, equipment manufacturers, software companies, materials scientists, and engineers spread across multiple continents. No single nation controls every piece of the process. No single company possesses every capability. Innovation has become increasingly interconnected. Perhaps that is Silicon Valley's most enduring legacy, not merely the companies it produced, but the model it revealed. An innovation ecosystem is strongest when curiosity, education, investment, competition, and long-term thinking reinforce one another. It cannot be built overnight. It cannot simply be purchased. It must grow, patiently across decades, often in ways that are invisible until history looks back. That may also explain why the most important technological revolution of the next 50 years is unlikely to begin with a dramatic announcement. It may begin quietly, inside a university laboratory where graduate students are experimenting with ideas that seem impractical, inside a government research program exploring technologies whose applications remain uncertain, inside a small startup with only a handful of employees, inside an overlooked industrial town reinventing itself, or inside an ordinary building in a place the world barely notices today. History has shown us that revolutions rarely announce themselves in advance. They whisper before they roar. The orchards of the Santa Clara Valley never knew they were standing on the future. The engineers soldering circuits in garages never imagined that billions of people would one day carry computers in their pockets. The scientists connecting 4 university computers through ARPANET could not foresee a world where nearly every human activity would depend upon the internet. The most transformative ideas often look surprisingly modest in the beginning. That is why Silicon Valley's story is ultimately not about California. It is not even about technology. It is about possibility. It reminds us that extraordinary change often begins where curiosity meets opportunity, where institutions support exploration, and where individuals are bold enough to imagine a different future. The next Silicon Valley may not emerge from a garage alone. It may already be taking shape quietly, in a university lab, a government research program, a startup workshop, or a place that today seems every bit as ordinary as the Santa Clara Valley once did. History suggests we should pay attention, because somewhere right now, the future may already be under construction. And now, as this long journey through the hidden history of Silicon Valley comes to its peaceful end, allow the lights of the laboratories to fade, the launch pads to fall silent, and the quiet California breeze to drift gently through the old orchards where this remarkable story first began. Imagine the stars above shining over Stanford's campus, over the garages where impossible dreams once took shape, and over the valleys where ideas slowly became inventions that changed the world. There is nothing more to discover tonight. The questions have been explored, the mysteries gently unraveled, and the story has found its resting place. Let your breathing become slow and effortless. Feel every muscle relax, every thought grow lighter, and every worry quietly drift away like a distant satellite crossing a peaceful night sky. Perhaps somewhere, even now, another young student is sketching an idea on a notebook. Another researcher is making a quiet discovery, or another forgotten town is beginning a journey that history has not yet noticed. But those stories belong to another night. For now, simply rest. Close your eyes. Let the calm of this remarkable journey settle gently around you, and allow yourself to drift into a deep, peaceful, and restorative sleep.